Welcome to NightSleepWhisper. Tonight, we drift 3,000 years into the past, to the golden heart of ancient Egypt. Let the gentle flow of the Nile wash away your worries as we uncover the Scribe's mystery. This is the story of Hori and Merit, a tale of courage, ancient truths, and hidden shadows. Close your eyes, let go of the day, and let the echoes of history carry you into a deep, restorative sleep. Our story begins now. The sun was very hot over the city of Thebes. The sky was a bright blue, and the great river Nile moved slowly through the valley. In a small, quiet room, a man named Hori sat at a wooden desk. Hori was a scribe. He was 30 years old, and he was very good at his job. He used a small brush to write on a long piece of yellow papyrus. He loved the smell of the ink and the feel of the paper. Hori worked for the library of the city. He lived a quiet life. He did not like trouble. But today, trouble was coming for him. A man entered the room quickly. He was a tall guard from the great temple. The guard looked tired and his face was very serious. He did not say hello. He looked at Hori and spoke in a low voice. "You are Hori the scribe?" the guard asked. Hori put down his brush carefully. "Yes, I am," he replied. "Why are you here?" "The high priest wants to see you," the guard said. "You must come to the great temple now. It is very important." Hori felt a little bit of fear in his chest. The high priest was a very powerful man. He only talked to important people. Hori was just a scribe. He stood up and followed the guard out into the street. The streets of Thebes were busy. Men were carrying heavy baskets of fruit. Other men were selling beautiful clothes and gold jewelry. Hori and the guard walked past the big market and toward the tall walls of the great temple. The temple was the most beautiful building in the city. It had huge stone pillars and large statues of the gods. When they arrived at the temple, the air was cooler. The light was soft inside the stone walls. The guard led Hori to a private room at the back of the temple. Inside the room, an older man stood by a large window. He wore long white robes and a heavy gold necklace. This was the high priest. The high priest turned around. His eyes were dark and full of worry. He looked at Hori for a long time. "Hori," the high priest said, "I know you are a smart man. I know you are honest. I have a very difficult task for you." "I am a scribe, my lord," Hori said with a bow. "I only write words on paper." The high priest walked closer. He leaned in and spoke quietly. "The chief architect is dead. We found his body this morning in his workroom. This is a very big problem. The pharaoh is coming to Thebes very soon. The architect was building the new palace for the pharaoh. If the work is not finished, the pharaoh will be very angry." Hori looked at the priest. Was he old? Was he sick? The high priest shook his head. "No. He was young and strong. He was healthy yesterday. I think someone killed him." "Hori, I need you to find the truth before the pharaoh arrives. You must look at his room. You must look at his papers. You must find out who did this." Hori stood very still. He looked at the high priest. The room was silent, and the smell of expensive incense filled the air. Hori was a man of books and ink. He was not a soldier. He was not a detective. He felt like a small bird in a large storm. "My lord," Hori said slowly, "I am honored, but I am only a scribe. I do not know how to find a killer. Why do you choose me?" The high priest walked to a large table. On the table, there were many maps of the city and the river. He pointed to a map of the new palace. "The soldiers are strong, but they are not quiet. They ask questions with their swords. People are afraid of them. But you, Hori, you are different. You look at small details. You see the things that other people miss. You understand how people think. The high priest picked up a small object from the table. It was a copper ring with a special symbol on it. He held it out to Hori. Take this. It is my seal. If anyone stops you, show them this ring. They will help you. You have my permission to go anywhere in the temple and the palace. Hori took the ring. It was heavy and cold in his hand. He put it on his finger. It felt strange. When does the pharaoh arrive? He asked. 10 days. The high priest replied. His voice was low and very serious. The pharaoh is a man of order. He expects the new palace to be perfect. If he arrives and finds the architect dead and no one knows why, he will think we are weak. He will think there is a secret plan against him. He might punish the whole city. Hori felt the weight of the 10 days. 10 days was not a long time. The city of Thebes was large, and there were many people with secrets. I will do my best, my lord. Hori said. He bowed again. Go now. The high priest said. Start with the architect's workroom. It is in the north wing of the temple. Nothing has been moved. The guards are waiting for you there. Hori turned and walked out of the room. He walked through the long stone hallways of the temple. The walls were covered in beautiful paintings of the gods and the history of Egypt. Usually, Hori loved to look at these paintings. Today, he did not see them. He only thought about the dead man. He walked past 2 large statues of lions. The stone was warm from the sun. He saw the guards standing in front of a heavy wooden door. They looked at him with hard eyes. Hori showed them the copper ring on his finger. The guards stepped aside and opened the door. The air inside the workroom was hot and still. There were many pieces of papyrus on the tables. There were small stone models of the palace on the floor. Hori took a deep breath. He was afraid, but he knew he must begin. He needed to find out who wanted the architect dead, and he only had 10 days to find the answer. The workroom was very large. High windows let in the bright afternoon light. Dust danced in the air. Hori walked slowly into the center of the room. He saw a large wooden table covered with drawings. These were the plans for the pharaoh's new palace. The lines were perfect and very detailed. The architect, a man named Ameni, had been a master of his craft. Hori looked at the floor. There was a dark stain on the stone near the desk. He knew that was where the body had been. He felt a shiver of cold, even though the room was hot. He began to look at everything very carefully. He looked under the table. He looked behind the large stone statues. He checked the corners of the room. Think like a scribe. Hori whispered to himself. Look for the things that do not belong. He moved to Ameni's desk. There were many tools here. There were copper rulers, small brushes, and pots of black and red ink. Everything looked normal. Then, Hori noticed something small. It was hidden behind a stack of papyrus. It was a small jar. It was made of beautiful blue glass. The color was as deep as the sea. Hori had never seen a jar like this in Thebes. Most jars were made of clay or simple stone. This was expensive. This was from a different place. He picked up the blue jar. It felt smooth and cool in his hand. He pulled out the small wooden stopper. Immediately, a very strong smell filled the room. It was not the smell of ink or old paper. It was the smell of flowers. But these were not flowers from the Nile. The scent was heavy, sweet, and a little bit spicy. It made Hori's head feel light. What is this? Hori wondered. He put the stopper back into the jar quickly. He looked around the room again. He noticed the window was open. The workroom was on the ground floor. Outside the window was a small garden with palm trees. Hori walked to the window and looked at the ground outside. The sand was disturbed. There were deep marks in the dirt. It looked like someone had jumped from the window and run toward the temple walls. Hori felt a sense of excitement. He had his first clue. The architect did not die from a sickness. The blue jar was strange, and the open window was suspicious. He went back to the desk and looked at the blueprints again. He noticed something strange on the edge of the paper. There was a small drop of blue liquid. It was the same color as the jar. It looked like the architect was holding the jar before he died. Hori placed the blue jar into a small leather bag. He needed to find out what was inside it. He knew a woman named Merit who worked in the temple gardens. She knew every flower and every plant in Egypt. Perhaps she could tell him where this strange smell came from. He left the workroom and locked the door behind him. The sun was starting to go down. The sky was turning orange and pink. He had 9 days left, and the mystery was only beginning. Hori walked through the quiet gardens of the temple. The sun was now very low, and long shadows stretched across the grass. The air was sweet with the smell of lotus flowers and wet earth. He saw Merit standing near a group of tall papyrus plants. She was a tall woman with kind eyes and strong, clever hands. She was responsible for all the plants used in the temple's medicines and oils. Merit, Hori said quietly. She turned and smiled at him. Hori, you are working late today. Why is your face so serious? Hori looked around to make sure they were alone. I need your help. It is about the architect. Ameni. Merit's smile disappeared. She looked at the ground. It is a very sad day. Ameni was a good man. He loved the beauty of this city. Hori took the small blue jar out of his bag. He opened the stopper and held it toward her. Do you recognize this smell? Merit took a deep breath. She closed her eyes and waited for a moment. Then, she frowned. Her face became very pale. This is not a flower from our gardens. Hori, this is the scent of the blue lily, but it is mixed with something else. It is a plant from the mountains far to the north. It is very rare and very expensive. Is it dangerous? Hori asked. Merit nodded slowly. In a small amount, it helps people sleep. But if the oil is strong, it can stop a man's heart. Why do you have this? I found it in Ameni's workroom. Hori replied. I think someone used this to kill him. Merit touched Hori's arm. Her hand was shaking a little. Hori, be very careful. Ameni came to see me 3 days ago. He did not look well. He was looking over his shoulder. He asked me if I knew of any poisons that had no color. Did he say why? Hori asked. He said he found something he was not supposed to see. Merit whispered. He told me he was afraid of a man in the market. He called him the man with the cold eyes. He said this man was watching the palace construction every day. Hori looked at the blue jar. This small object was a bridge to a distant land. The mystery was growing larger than the temple walls. It was not just about a dead man anymore. It was about a secret that someone wanted to keep hidden at any cost. Thank you, Merit. Hori said. Keep this a secret. Do not tell anyone we spoke. I will be silent. Merit promised. But please, Hori, look behind you in the dark. This killer is like a snake in the grass. Hori left the garden and walked toward the main gates. The stars were beginning to appear in the dark sky. He knew where he had to go next. He had to find the man with the cold eyes in the busy market of Thebes. The market of Thebes was a place of 1,000 colors and loud voices. Even though it was late, the torches were lit, and the smell of roasted meat and spices filled the air. Hori walked through the crowd. He kept his head down. He did not want anyone to recognize him. He was looking for a specific shop, a place that sold rare glass and oils from the north. He stopped an old man selling baskets. "Peace be with you," Hori said. "I'm looking for the man who sells blue glass jars. Do you know where his shop is?" The old man looked at Hori. He pointed a thin finger toward a narrow, dark street at the edge of the market. "The merchant of Sidon." The old man whispered, "His shop is at the end of that path. But be careful. Scribe. People say he is a man of secrets." Hori thanked the man and walked into the narrow street. Here, the noise of the market was quiet. The walls of the houses were close together. It was hard to see in the shadows. Finally, he reached a small shop with a heavy wooden door. Above the door, there was a small piece of blue glass. Hori knocked on the door. There was no answer. He knocked again, harder this time. Still, there was only silence. He pushed the door, and to his surprise, it opened with a slow movement. The shop was a mess. Hori stepped inside and felt his heart beat faster. Tables were turned over. Broken glass lay all over the floor like sparkling blue stars. The beautiful blue jars were smashed. The smell of many different oils was very strong and confusing. It was clear that someone had searched this place very quickly and very violently. "Is anyone here?" Hori asked. His voice was small in the empty room. He walked to the back of the shop. There was a small desk. On the desk, there was a piece of parchment. It was torn in half. Hori picked it up. He saw a few words written in a language he did not know. It was not the writing of Egypt. As he looked at the floor, something caught the light. He reached down and picked up a small object from the dirt. It was a gold coin. Hori held it up to the light of his small lamp. He frowned. The coin did not have the face of a pharaoh. It showed a strange bird with 2 heads. "This is not our money," Hori said to himself. "This is from the land of the Hittites." Suddenly, Hori felt a cold wind on his neck. He felt like someone was standing behind him in the dark corners of the shop. He turned around quickly, but he saw nothing but shadows. The man with the cold eyes was not there, but Hori knew he was close. He put the gold coin and the torn parchment in his bag. He had to leave before the guards, or the killer, found him here. The mystery was no longer just about a dead architect. It was now about a foreign power and a golden coin. Hori stepped out of the merchant's shop and into the cold night air. The narrow street was silent now. The busy sounds of the market felt very far away. He held his bag tightly against his side. The gold coin and the blue jar felt heavy. He knew he had found something dangerous. He started to walk quickly back toward the temple. After a few minutes, Hori stopped. He did not turn his head, but he listened very carefully. He heard a soft sound behind him. It was the sound of leather boots on the dry ground. Someone was walking at the same speed as him. When Hori walked faster, the footsteps behind him walked faster too. Hori felt a cold sweat on his forehead. He was not a fighter. He was a man of books. He turned a corner into an even smaller alley. He looked back for just a second. In the dim light of a distant torch, he saw a shadow. It was a very tall man. The man wore a dark cloak that covered his face. He moved silently, like a cat hunting a mouse. "He is following me," Hori whispered. Hori began to run. His heart was hitting his chest like a drum. He did not go toward the main street because the man would see him easily. Instead, he moved deeper into the old part of Thebes. The houses here were broken and empty. This was a place of shadows. He saw an old building with a heavy stone door that was slightly open. He slipped inside and pulled the door closed very quietly. The air inside was thick with dust and the smell of old wood. It was very dark. This was a house of shadows, a place where no one lived anymore. Hori stood behind the door. He did not move. He did not even want to breathe. He pressed his ear against the cold stone. Outside, the footsteps stopped. There was a long silence. Hori waited. He felt time moving very slowly. Then, he heard the sound again. The tall man was right outside the door. Hori could hear the man's slow, steady breathing. The man stood there for a long time. Hori prayed to the gods for safety. He thought about the architect and the blue jar. Was this the man with the cold eyes that Merit spoke about? Finally, the footsteps started again. They moved away, getting quieter and quieter until they disappeared completely. Hori waited for another 10 minutes before he moved. His legs felt weak. He looked around the dark room. He realized he was near the back of the temple district. He needed to get home, but he could not go to his usual house. If the man was following him, his house was no longer safe. He needed a place to hide and think about the gold coin. He needed to find out why a Hittite coin was in a shop in Thebes. Hori waited until the moon was high in the sky. The city was quiet now. He left the House of Shadows and walked through the back streets. He reached the great temple. The guards at the gate were tired. Hori showed them the copper ring once more. They did not ask any questions. They let him enter the cold stone halls. He returned to the architect's workroom. He did not light a large lamp. He used a small candle because he did not want anyone to see light under the door. The room felt different at night. The stone models of the palace looked like small, ghostly cities. I missed something. Hori whispered. Ameni was a clever man. He knew he was in danger. He would not leave his secrets on top of a table. Hori went back to the large wooden desk. He began to touch every inch of the wood. He felt the legs of the table. He felt the bottom of the drawers. For a long time, he found nothing. Then, his fingers touched a small piece of wood that felt loose. It was on the side of the desk, hidden behind a heavy leg. He pushed the piece of wood. There was a soft click. A tiny drawer opened. It was so small that only a thin piece of paper could fit inside. Hori reached in and pulled out a small, folded note. He held the note near his candle. The writing was messy. It looked like Ameni had written it very quickly. The ink was smudged in some places. Hori read the words carefully. They want me to build a path to the sun, the note said. But the sun does not belong under the earth. I have seen the shadows in the north wall. There is a room under the feet of the gods. I will not finish the work. It is a trap for the Great One. Hori felt a cold chill. The Great One was a name for the pharaoh. The note was a warning. Ameni was not just building a palace. He was being forced to build a trap. The room under the feet of the gods must be a secret room under the temple or the palace. Hori looked at the note again. The shadows in the north wall. He read. He looked toward the north wall of the workroom. It was covered in a large painting of the god Osiris. Osiris was the god of the afterlife. He sat on a throne, and his feet rested on a stone platform. Hori walked to the painting. He touched the stone feet of the god. The stone felt very cold. He pushed the wall, but nothing happened. He realized he needed help. He could not find the entrance alone in the dark. He needed someone who knew the temple better than he did. He needed Merit. He hid the note in his bag. He knew the mystery was much bigger than one dead man. Someone was planning to kill the pharaoh, and they were using the temple as a hiding place. Hori had to find Merit and tell her about the secret room before it was too late. Hori left the workroom and walked quickly to the small stone house where Merit lived. It was near the edge of the temple gardens. The night was very quiet. Even the insects in the grass were silent. He knocked softly on her wooden door. He waited for a moment. Then, he heard a small movement inside. Merit opened the door. She looked tired, and her hair was messy from sleep. She held a small oil lamp in her hand. When she saw Hori, her eyes became wide. She saw the worry on his face. She stepped back and waved her hand for him to come inside quickly. "Hori, what is wrong?" she asked in a whisper. "It is the middle of the night. Is someone following you?" Hori sat down on a wooden stool. He took a deep breath. "I found a note. Merit. Ameni wrote it before he died. He was building a trap. He says there is a secret room under the feet of the gods on the north wall." Merit put her lamp on the table. The light made her shadow look very tall against the wall. The north wall. That is where the great painting of Osiris is. Many people walk past that wall every day. How can there be a secret room there? "I don't know," Hori replied. "But the note said the Great One is in danger. That means the Pharaoh. We must go there now. I tried to move the stone alone, but I could not. I need your help. You know the history of this temple. You know how these old stones were placed." Merit looked afraid, but she nodded her head. She put on a heavy shawl and picked up her lamp. "We must be very careful. Hori, there are more guards near the north wall at night. We must move like shadows." They left her house and walked back toward the great temple. The air was much colder now. The wind moved through the palm trees, making a soft rustling sound. They did not use the main path. They walked behind the large pillars and stayed in the dark areas. When they reached the temple, they saw the torches on the walls. The fire was low and orange. The light flickered, making the statues of the gods look like they were moving. Hori and Merit waited behind a large stone column until a guard walked past. When the guard was gone, they ran to the north wall. The painting of Osiris looked different in the dim light. The god's green face looked stern and powerful. Hori pointed to the stone feet of the god. The note said the room is under his feet. Hori whispered. Merit held her lamp close to the floor. She did not look at the feet. She looked at the floor stones. She touched the cracks between the stones with her fingers. She moved her hand along the wall. "Look here," she said quietly. "The dust is different in this corner. Someone has cleaned this part of the wall recently. And look at this stone. It has a small mark on it. It is the symbol of a mountain." Hori felt a surge of hope. This was it. They were standing right on top of a secret. Merit moved her fingers slowly across the stone with the mountain symbol. She pressed the center of the mark. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, a low grinding sound came from the floor. A large stone block began to move backward. It was very heavy, and the sound of stone against stone was loud in the quiet temple. Hori looked around quickly, but no guards appeared. "It is opening," Hori whispered. The stone block slid away, showing a dark, narrow opening in the floor. A set of steep stairs went down into the earth. The air that came from the hole was very old and dry. It smelled like dust and forgotten things. Merit held her lamp over the opening. The light did not reach the bottom. "We must go down," Merit said. Her voice was brave, but Hori saw her hand shaking. They walked down the stairs carefully. The steps were small and slippery. Hori counted 20 steps before they reached a flat floor. Merit held the lamp high. The light hit the walls, and Hori gasped. The room was filled with gold. But it was not the beautiful gold of Egypt. There were many small statues on the floor. They were statues of birds with 2 heads. These were the same symbols Hori saw on the gold coin in the empty shop. There were also tall jars made of the same blue glass he found in the architect's room. "This is a treasure room," Merit said. "But it is not for the gods of Thebes." Hori walked to a large wooden chest in the center of the room. The wood was dark and very old. On top of the chest, there was a clay seal. The seal showed the name of the pharaoh. But the seal was broken. Someone had opened the chest recently. Hori opened the heavy lid. Inside, there were no jewels or gold. Instead, the chest was full of foreign weapons. There were long bronze swords and sharp spears. These were the weapons of a great army. "Look at this, Merit," Hori said. He picked up a piece of papyrus from the bottom of the chest. It was a map. It showed the new palace and the pharaoh's throne room. There was a red line that started in this secret room and went directly under the palace. The architect was not just building a palace. Hori realized. The high priest and his friends were using a meni to hide an army's weapons under the temple. This secret room leads to a tunnel. On the day the pharaoh arrives, they can take these weapons and attack him from below the earth. Suddenly, they heard a loud noise from above. It was the sound of the stone block sliding back into its place. The small square of light from the stairs disappeared. "The door!" Merit cried. They ran back to the stairs, but it was too late. The heavy stone was closed. They were trapped in the dark room with the golden birds and the weapons of war. The darkness felt like a heavy blanket. Merit's small oil lamp was the only light in the room. The flame was dancing, and it made long, scary shadows on the walls. Hori ran up the stone stairs. He pushed against the heavy stone ceiling with both hands. He pushed until his arms hurt. The stone did not move even a little bit. "It is locked," Hori said. His voice was shaking. "Someone pushed it from the outside. They know we are here." Merit came up the stairs behind him. She looked at the stone and then at Hori. "Is it the guards? Maybe they saw the light and thought we were thieves." "I do not think so," Hori replied. "A guard would open the door and arrest us. Someone wants us to stay down here. They want us to disappear." They went back down into the secret room. The room was cold. The golden birds with 2 heads looked at them with strange, metal eyes. Hori felt like the statues were watching them. He looked at the wooden chest full of foreign swords. This room was a place of death and war. "We must find another way out," Merit said. She walked around the edges of the room. She held her lamp close to the walls. Every secret room has a second door. The builders always want a way to escape if there is a fire or a collapse. Hori looked at the floor. He saw more of the blue glass jars in a corner. One of the jars was broken. The sweet, spicy smell of the blue lily oil was very strong here. It made him feel dizzy. He covered his nose with his sleeve. Suddenly, they heard a sound from above. It was the sound of someone walking on the temple floor. The footsteps were heavy and slow. Then, they heard a voice. It was a deep, cold voice. It sounded like the wind in a tomb. "You should not have come here, Scribe," the voice said. The words came through the small cracks in the stone door. "You are too curious. Curiosity is a dangerous thing in Thebes." "Who are you?" Hori shouted. "Open this door. The high priest knows I am here." The man above laughed. It was not a happy sound. The high priest is a man of many faces. He only knows what I tell him. You will stay here now. You will be a secret, just like this room. The footsteps moved away. Hori and Merit were alone again. The lamp was starting to run out of oil. The light was getting smaller and smaller. Hori felt a cold fear in his heart. They had the evidence, and they knew the truth about the trap. But the truth was useless if they died in the dark. Hori. Merritt whispered. The lamp is going out. Hori looked around the room one last time before the darkness came. He saw a small, dark hole behind one of the statues. It looked like a tunnel. There. Hori said. There is a path. We must go now, before the light dies. The small flame of the lamp flickered one last time and then went out. The room became perfectly dark. Hori could not even see his own hand in front of his face. He felt Merritt's hand grab his arm. Her grip was tight and her palm was cold. Do not move. Merritt. Hori said. His voice sounded loud in the small space. I saw a hole behind the bird statue. It looked like a tunnel. We must find it with our hands. They moved slowly. Hori kept one hand on the cold stone wall. He felt the rough surface of the paintings. He felt the feet of the gods. Finally, his fingers touched the smooth, cold metal of the golden bird statue. He moved his hand behind it. There was a space. The air here felt a little bit warmer. I found it. He whispered. Follow me. Stay low. They crawled into the small opening. The tunnel was very narrow. Hori had to move on his hands and knees. The floor was covered in soft sand and sharp rocks. Every time he moved, he heard the sound of his clothes rubbing against the stone. He could hear Merritt breathing behind him. She was moving carefully. After a few minutes, the tunnel stopped. Hori reached out his hand and hit a wall. It was not a smooth wall like the others. It was made of many small stones. He felt the edges of the rocks. They were loose. The path is blocked. Hori said. He felt a moment of panic. But the stones are not solid. I think this was a window or a small door a long time ago. Someone filled it with rocks to hide it. Hori pushed against one of the stones. It did not move. He tried another one. This one felt a little bit loose. He pulled at it with his fingers. He pulled until his fingernails hurt. Suddenly, the stone moved. It came out of the wall and fell to the ground. A tiny bit of moonlight came through the small hole. It was a beautiful, silver light. I can see the moon. Merritt said. Her voice was full of hope. Hori worked quickly now. He pulled out more stones. One by one, the wall began to break. He removed a large rock, then another. Finally, the hole was big enough for a person to climb through. He crawled out of the hole and stood up. He felt the cool night wind on his face. He reached back and helped Merritt climb out. They were standing in a small courtyard at the very back of the temple. This place was old and full of tall grass. No guards came here because there were no gold statues or beautiful paintings. It was a place for the servants to wash clothes. Hori looked back at the wall they just came through. The hole was hidden behind a large pile of broken pots. We are out. Hori said. He looked at the moon. But we are not safe. The man in the dark knows we are alive. He knows we have the secrets of the room. Merritt looked at the temple walls. We must tell the high priest tomorrow morning. He must know about the weapons and the foreign coin. Hori touched the copper ring on his finger. He thought about the cold voice in the dark. The voice said the high priest only knew what he was told. Was the high priest a friend, or was he part of the trap? Hori did not know who to trust. Hori and Merritt stayed in the shadows of the tall grass for a long time. They did not speak. They listened to the wind. After a few minutes, they were sure no one was coming. They walked quietly away from the temple walls and went toward Hori's small office in the library. It was the only place where Hori felt safe with his books and papers. Inside the office, Hori lit a small candle. He took the blueprints and the notes out of his bag. He spread the large pieces of papyrus on his desk. His hands were still covered in dust from the secret tunnel. "Look at this. Merit," Hori said. He pointed to the drawings of the new palace. "I am a scribe. I spent many years learning how to read the plans of the great builders." Ameni was very smart, but he left a message in the lines of his drawings. Merit leaned over the table. "I see a palace. I see big rooms for the pharaoh and a beautiful garden. What do you see?" Hori moved his finger to a section of the plan labeled the Golden Hall. He took a small copper ruler and measured the walls on the paper. In a palace, the walls are thin to let the air move. But look here. These walls are 3 times thicker than they need to be. And here, in the center of the hall, there is a space with no doors and no windows. He looked at Merit. His eyes were wide. "This is not a palace room, Merit. A room with thick stone walls and no windows is a tomb." Ameni was not just building a home for the living. He was building a house of eternity inside the palace. Merit touched the paper. "A tomb. But the pharaoh is alive and healthy. Why would he need a tomb inside his palace in the city? The tombs are always in the mountains, far away from the people." "Exactly," Hori replied. "This tomb is for an unknown person. There is no name on the plan. But look at the floor. The trap is right above this secret tomb. If the floor breaks, the person on the throne falls directly into this stone room. Then, the stone door closes. No one would ever find them." Hori felt a cold chill. The plan was perfect and terrible. The high priest and the man with the cold eyes wanted to kill the pharaoh and hide his body forever. If the pharaoh disappeared inside his own palace, the high priest could say the gods took him. Then, the high priest would be the most powerful man in Egypt. Ameni knew this. Merit whispered. That is why he stopped the work. He was a builder of beauty, not a builder of death. Hori nodded. He refused to finish the House of Eternity. That is why they killed him with the rare oil. Now, they are using the foreign mercenary and the secret army to finish the work before the pharaoh arrives. Hori looked at the map again. He needed to know who this unknown person was. Was it really the pharaoh, or did the high priest have an even darker secret? The next morning, the sun rose over the temple with a bright, hot light. Hori and Merit did not sleep much. They spent the rest of the night in the library, hiding the blueprints under a pile of old tax records. They knew they had to find the source of the rare oil. If they found the person who brought the oil to Thebes, they would find the killer. Hori stood near the main gates of the temple. He watched the workers and the visitors. Suddenly, he saw a large wooden cart. It was pulled by 2 slow oxen. The wheels of the cart made a heavy, grinding noise on the stone path. A man sat on the front of the cart. He was not Egyptian. He wore a long tunic made of heavy wool and a thick, dark beard. He looked like a man who spent a lot of time on the sea. The man stopped the cart in the courtyard. He began to take wooden boxes off the back. Hori walked closer, moving slowly so he did not look suspicious. He saw one of the boxes was open. Inside, sitting in soft straw, were several small jars. They were made of the same deep blue glass Hori found in the architect's room. "You have beautiful jars," Hori said to the man. The merchant looked up. His eyes were sharp and grey. "They are from the city of Sidon," he said. His voice was deep and his accent was strong. "The glass is special. It keeps the oils cool even in this heat." "What kind of oils do you sell?" Hori asked. He looked at the jars carefully. The merchant smiled, but his eyes stayed cold. I sell many things. I sell perfumes for the ladies and oils for the priests. I even have the rare oil of the blue lily. Hori felt his heart beat faster. That is a very rare scent. Is it expensive? Very expensive. The merchant replied, only 3 people in this city can buy it. I sold the last of my stock 2 days ago. Hori leaned in a little. To whom did you sell it? I would like to buy some for a gift. The merchant stopped working. He looked at Hori for a long time. He saw the scribe's simple clothes, but then he saw the copper ring on Hori's finger. He recognized the seal of the high priest. He wiped his hands on his tunic. I sold 1 jar to a man with a gold bird on his cloak. The merchant said quietly, and I delivered 4 more jars to the house of the high priest himself. He said he needed them for the pharaoh's arrival. Hori felt a wave of cold fear. Merit was right. The mystery went all the way to the top of the temple. If the high priest had the poison, then Hori was in great danger. He was working for the man who was likely the leader of the plot. Thank you, Hori said. He turned to leave, but the merchant grabbed his arm. Be careful, Scribe. The merchant whispered. In my country, we say that when the big fish fight, the small fish get eaten. You are a very small fish in a very deep river. Hori let go of the merchant's arm. His mind was spinning like a wheel in the mud. He looked at the wooden boxes on the cart. Each one held a secret from a land across the sea. The merchant was still watching him with those sharp, grey eyes. Tell me more about this oil, Hori said. He kept his voice low. You said it is rare. Is it used for medicine? The merchant laughed softly. Some people call it medicine. It brings a very deep sleep. It is a sleep from which a man does not wake up. In the city of Sidon, the kings use it to kill their enemies quietly. It has no taste when you put it in wine. It has no color. Only the sweet smell of the blue lily remains for a few minutes. Then, the smell is gone, and the man is gone too. And the man with the gold bird? Hori asked. Was he a merchant too? No, the merchant replied. He leaned closer. He was a warrior. He had a sharp scar on his neck and a very long sword. He did not talk much. He paid with gold coins that had the same bird on them. He said he was working for a great house in the city. Hori thanked the merchant and walked away quickly. He felt like the ground was moving under his feet. The great house was clearly the temple. The high priest was not just a leader of the gods. He was a leader of killers. He found Merit near the lotus pond. She was cleaning the water. When she saw Hori, she stood up quickly. She saw the fear in his eyes. What did he say? She asked. The high priest bought the oil. Merit, Hori said. He felt a lump in his throat. And the man with the gold bird, the mercenary, has it too. They used it to kill many because he would not build their trap. And they will use it again when the pharaoh arrives. Merit looked at the large temple towers. We are in the house of our enemy. Hori, we are standing in the middle of their camp. I know, Hori said. The merchant told me the oil leaves no trace in the body. That is why everyone thinks a many died of a weak heart. No one will know the pharaoh was murdered. They will think it was the will of the gods. Suddenly, Merit pointed toward the high balcony of the temple. A man was standing there. He was looking down at them. He wore long white robes, and the sun hit a gold object on his chest. It was the high priest. He was watching them talk. He did not move. He just stood there like a stone statue. He knows. Merit whispered. He knows we are talking about him. Hori did not look up. We must go. We need to find a way to stop them before the pharaoh drinks the wine. But first, we must hide." Hori and Merit walked away from the pond quickly. They did not look back at the high balcony. Hori felt the high priest's eyes on his back like a hot fire. They reached a quiet corner near the outer wall of the temple. The tall stone walls blocked the wind, and the air was very heavy. "We cannot stay together," Hori said. "If the high priest sees us together, he will know we are working as a team. He thinks I am just a scribe, but he knows you are the keeper of the gardens. Go to your house. Stay quiet. I will return to the library and pretend to work on the tax records." Merit looked at him. Her face was very pale, but her eyes were determined. "I cannot just sit and wait. Hori, there is something I must check." The merchant said he delivered 4 jars to the high priest, but I saw a different cart leaving the temple gates this morning. It was heading toward the desert, toward the Valley of the Kings. "It is too dangerous, Merit," Hori warned. "The desert is a place of heat and death." "I know the paths," she replied. "I will be careful." Before Hori could stop her, Merit turned and walked away. She moved through the temple servants with ease. Hori watched her go until she was just a small speck in the distance. He felt a deep sense of worry, but he knew he had to follow his own plan. Hori spent the next few hours in the library. He sat at his desk and held a brush, but he did not write any words. He listened to every sound. He heard the distant voices of the priests and the sound of the wind in the trees. Every time a door opened, he jumped. He thought the guards were coming for him. 1 hour passed, then 2, then 3. The sun began to move toward the west. The light in the library turned a deep gold. Merit did not return. Hori started to pace back and forth. He looked at the copper ring on his finger. It felt like a heavy chain. Finally, just as the first shadows of evening appeared, the library door opened. Hori turned around quickly. It was Merit. He almost did not recognize her. Her beautiful white linen dress was now a dull brown. It was covered in thick, heavy dust. Her dark hair was messy and filled with fine golden sand. Even her face was covered in a layer of grit. She looked exhausted, and her breath was coming in short gasps. "Merit." Hori ran to her. He helped her sit down on a wooden bench. He gave her a cup of cool water from a clay jar. "What happened? Where were you?" Merit drank the water quickly. She wiped her mouth with the back of her hand. "I followed the cart. Hori," she whispered. Her voice was scratchy from the sand. "I followed it far into the desert, past the old tombs. They are not just hiding weapons in the temple. They are building something out there, under the sand. I saw the mercenary. He was giving orders to 100 men." Hori looked at her sandy clothes. The mystery was no longer inside the city walls. It was spreading into the great silence of the desert. Hori watched Merit as she cleaned the sand from her face. Her hands were still shaking. The news of an army in the desert was the most dangerous secret they had found. If 100 men were waiting in the silence of the sand, the pharaoh's life was in great danger. "We need to know exactly where they are," Hori said. He stood up and looked at the thousands of scrolls on the library shelves. "The desert is large, but men cannot live there without water. They must be near an old well or a hidden path." Merit shook her head. "I could not see a well. They were near the high cliffs, in a place where the sun disappears early. It looked like a dead end." Hori began to search. He moved past the records of grain and the lists of cattle. He went to the very back of the library. This was the place for old things. The air was thick with the smell of dry papyrus and age. He pulled out a heavy, leather-bound tube. Inside was a very old scroll. The paper was dark and fragile. He spread the scroll on the table. It was a map of the Valley of the Kings. This map was not used by the priests or the tax collectors. It was a map for the royal builders from 100 years ago. "Look here," Hori whispered. He pointed to a thin, wavy line that moved through the mountains. "This is the main road. But look at these small dots." Merritt leaned in. The light of the candle was low. "What are they?" "They are the hidden breaths," Hori explained. "They are small tunnels and paths built inside the rocks. The workers use them to move stone without being seen by the public. One of these paths leads from the deep desert directly to the back of the valley." He moved his finger along a dotted line. His heart started to beat faster. The line did not stop at the valley. It continued under the earth. It moved toward the city, toward the site of the new palace. The army doesn't need to march on the road. Hori realized. They can use these old paths. They can walk under the mountains and appear inside the city walls in one night. While the pharaoh is celebrating his arrival, the mercenary and his men will be rising from the ground like ghosts. Merritt touched the old map. This is why they needed the architect. He was the only one who knew how to connect the new palace to these old tunnels. He knew the secrets of the stone. Hori rolled up the scroll. He felt a heavy weight on his shoulders. He was just a scribe with a piece of paper, and he was fighting against an army and a high priest. He looked at the window. The moon was a thin silver curve in the sky. "We cannot stay here," Hori said. "The high priest will look for this map soon. He knows I am a scribe who likes to read. We must take it and hide." "Where can we go?" Merritt asked. "To the river," Hori replied. "The Nile is the only place where we can move without leaving tracks in the sand. We must find a way to warn the pharaoh before he reaches the city gates." Hori reached for the old map, but the library door opened with a loud sound. The heavy would hit the stone wall. Hori and Merritt jumped back from the table. The high priest walked into the room. He was not alone. 2 large guards with bronze spears stood behind him. The high priest did not look like a holy man now. His face was hard and his eyes were full of fire. He walked slowly toward the desk. He looked at the old map of the valley. A small, cold smile appeared on his lips. "You are a very busy scribe, Hori," the high priest said. His voice was like the sound of dry leaves. "I told you to find the killer of the architect. I did not tell you to steal secret maps from the great library." Hori felt his heart pounding. He tried to keep his voice steady. "My lord, I found a note from Ameni. He spoke about a secret room and a danger to the pharaoh. I was only trying to understand the truth." The high priest leaned over the table. He stood very close to Hori. "The truth is a dangerous thing for a man like you. You should stay with your ink and your paper. You are a scribe, not a judge. You are looking for things that are too big for your small mind." "I saw the blue jars, my lord," Hori said. He did not know why he said it, but the words came out. "I saw the foreign coin, and Merritt saw the men in the desert." The high priest looked at Merritt. His eyes were cold and sharp. Merritt did not look away, but she stayed silent. "The pharaoh is coming to bring order to Egypt," the high priest said. "But order requires a strong hand. Sometimes, a weak leader must be replaced by a stronger one. The gods have spoken to me. They want a man who understands the old ways, not a man who builds empty palaces." "You want the throne for yourself," Hori whispered. The high priest laughed. "I want what is best for the temple. And you, Hori, are a problem. You have 10 days to live. I told you, but you are moving too fast. Now, You are a danger to my plan." He turned to his guards. "Take the map. And keep these two in the library. Do not let them leave. If they try to run, use your spears." The guards stepped forward. One guard grabbed the old scroll from the table. The other guard stood by the door. The high priest looked at Hori one last time. "You think you are clever because you can read," he said. "But in the dark, everyone is the same. Stop asking questions. Hori, it is the only way you will see the sun tomorrow." The high priest walked out of the room. The guards pulled the heavy door closed. Hori heard the sound of a metal lock. They were prisoners in the very room where they found the truth. Hori and Merit were alone in the library. The door was locked, and the guards stood outside. The room was full of shadows. The high shelves of books looked like giant towers in the dark. Hori looked up at the small windows near the ceiling. They were too high to reach. "We cannot stay here," Hori said. He looked at the heavy wooden door. "The high priest thinks we are trapped, but he does not know this room as well as I do." Hori walked to a large wooden ladder. The ladder had wheels and was used to reach the highest scrolls. He pushed the ladder toward the back wall. Merit helped him push. They moved it to a place where a small service window stayed open for the library birds. "I will go first," Hori whispered. He climbed the ladder. His hands were sweaty, and the wood felt cold. When he reached the top, he pulled himself through the small window. He was on a narrow stone ledge outside. He reached down and helped Merit climb up. They dropped down into the soft grass of the garden. They were outside the library. Hori saw a light moving near the main temple building. It was a single torch. A man in white robes was walking toward the outer wall. It was the high priest. "He is going somewhere secret," Merit whispered. "Look. He is alone." Hori and Merit followed him. They stayed in the shadows of the tall pillars. They moved slowly and quietly. The high priest walked to a dark corner of the temple garden, near a large statue of a falcon. A man was already waiting there. The man was very tall. He wore a dark leather tunic and a long sword. Hori recognized him. He was the mercenary, the man with the cold eyes from the market. "Is everything ready?" the high priest asked. His voice was low but sharp. The tall man nodded. "The tunnel is finished. My men are in the desert, waiting for the signal. On the day the pharaoh sits on his throne, the floor will open. He will fall, and my men will rise from the earth. The city will be yours by sunset." The high priest smiled. "And the poison?" "I have the jars from the merchant. Keep them," the mercenary said. "If the fall does not kill him, the wine will finish the job." "But what about the scribe?" "He knows too much. He is locked in the library," the high priest replied. "The guards will deal with him tomorrow morning. He will not see the sun rise." Hori felt a cold chill in his bones. They were planning a double attack, a trap in the floor and poison in the wine. He looked at Merit. Her eyes were wide with fear. They had to get away and warn someone, but the high priest and the mercenary were between them and the main gate. Suddenly, the mercenary turned his head. He looked toward the shadows where Hori and Merit were hiding. He put his hand on the handle of his sword. "Did you hear that?" the mercenary asked. The mercenary took a slow step toward the darkness. His hand was tight on the handle of his long sword. His eyes were like a hawk searching for prey in the night. Hori felt his blood turn to ice. He looked at the ground and saw a small, heavy stone near his foot. He looked at Merit and pointed toward the far side of the garden. Merit understood. She picked up the stone and threw it with all her strength. The stone flew through the air and hit a large clay pot near the temple kitchen. The mercenary turned around instantly. There!" he shouted. He ran toward the sound of the broken pot. The high priest followed him, his white robes waving in the wind. "Now!" Hori whispered. He and Merit ran in the opposite direction. They moved past the library and toward Hori's small office. Hori knew he could not leave without his bag and his writing tools. A scribe without his tools was a man without a voice. They slipped into the small room and Hori closed the door softly. He went to his wooden desk. The room was messy. Someone had been here. His papers were on the floor, and his inkpots were turned over. Hori opened the main drawer of his desk. He wanted to find his emergency money, but his fingers touched something very different. He pulled out a heavy object. It was a ring made of pure, bright gold. In the center of the ring was a large red stone. The stone had the symbol of the pharaoh's private house, a golden lion. "Hori, what is that?" Merit asked. She walked closer and looked at the ring. Her face became very pale. "That is the royal ring. It belongs to the pharaoh's sister. It was stolen from the palace a month ago. The guards have been looking for it everywhere." Hori felt a heavy weight in his stomach. The high priest put this here. He realized. He didn't just lock us in the library. He made sure that if I escaped, I would be a thief in the eyes of the law. If the guards find me with this ring, no one will listen to my story about the trap. They will just cut off my hands and throw me in the river. It is a trap inside a trap. Merit said. He is very clever. Suddenly, they heard the sound of many feet on the stone path outside. There were loud voices and the light of many torches. "Open the door!" A guard shouted. "In the name of the high priest, open this door." Hori looked at the window. It was small, but they had no other choice. He put the golden ring into his bag. He did not want it, but he could not leave it there for the guards to find. He helped Merit climb through the window first. Then, he followed her into the dark night. They had to leave the temple and the city. They were no longer just witnesses. They were fugitives. Hori and Merit landed on the soft, dry earth outside the office window. They did not wait to look back. Behind them, inside the small room, the heavy wooden door broke open. Hori heard the angry shouts of the guards and the clinking of their bronze armor. "The room is empty," a guard yelled. They went through the window. After them. Torches lit up the night sky, casting long, orange shadows against the white temple walls. Hori grabbed Merit's hand, and they ran. They did not run toward the main gates, where many guards were waiting. Instead, they moved toward the narrow streets of the city. Thebes was quiet, but it was not empty. Hori and Merit moved like ghosts through the dark alleys. They stayed close to the mud brick walls of the houses. Every time they heard a footstep or saw the flicker of a distant torch, they stopped and waited in the darkness. Hori's heart was beating so fast he could feel it in his neck. He felt the heavy weight of the royal ring in his bag. It was a golden curse. "We must reach the river," Hori whispered. His breath was short. "The Nile is the only way out of the city without passing through the stone gates." Merit nodded. She was tired, but she did not stop. "The guards will check the boats soon. We need to find a place to hide before the sun rises." They turned a corner and saw the great river in the distance. The Nile looked like a giant, silver snake under the light of the moon. The water moved slowly and silently. On the banks of the river, there were many stacks of tall papyrus and large wooden crates waiting for the morning market. Suddenly, a group of 4 guards appeared at the end of the street. They carried long spears and bright lamps. The light from their lamps moved across the ground, getting closer and closer to the corner where Hori and Merit stood. "Stay down," Hori said. They crawled behind a large pile of dry bricks. Hori watched the guards through a small gap. The guards were talking about the scribe. They said the high priest offered a reward of 10 gold coins for Hori's head. Hori felt a cold chill. He was no longer a respected scribe of the library. He was a hunted animal. The guards walked past their hiding spot. Their footsteps moved away toward the temple. Hori waited until he could no longer hear them. He signaled to Merit, and they ran the last few steps to the riverbank. They found a small space under an old wooden pier. The wood smelled of fish and wet earth. The water of the Nile touched their feet. It was cold, but it felt good after the heat of the city. They sat in the dark, hidden by the heavy wooden beams of the pier. Hori looked at the dark water. The pharaoh was coming, and an army was waiting in the desert. He had a stolen ring in his bag and a death sentence on his head. He looked at Merit and saw that she was brave, but she was also very afraid. "We are safe for now," Hori said quietly. "But tomorrow, the betrayal hunt begins." The sky began to turn a soft purple, then a bright orange. The sun was rising over the distant mountains. Hori and Merit were still hiding under the wooden pier. Their clothes were damp and they were very tired. The Nile was beautiful in the morning light, but for Hori, it was a place of danger. Every shadow looked like a soldier. Suddenly, they heard the sound of footsteps on the wooden boards above their heads. Hori held his breath. He looked through the cracks and saw an old man. The man had grey hair and skin that was dark and wrinkled from the sun. He was carrying a large, heavy fishing net. The man walked down a small set of stairs to a boat tied to the pier. The boat was small and made of tall papyrus reeds. It was the kind of boat that poor fishermen used. The old man saw Hori's foot in the shadows. He stopped and looked down. He did not shout. He did not run. He just stood there and looked at them with quiet eyes. "You are the ones the guards are looking for," the old man said. His voice was like the sound of dry sand. "The scribe and the woman from the garden." Hori stood up slowly. He kept his hands where the man could see them. "We are not thieves," Hori said quietly. "The high priest is telling lies. We found a secret, and now he wants us to die." The fisherman looked at Hori's face for a long time. Then he looked at Merit. Merit looked back at him with brave eyes. The fisherman sighed and sat down on the edge of his boat. "The high priest is a man of gold and stone," the old man said. "He does not care about the people of the river. My name is Keti. I have lived on this river for 60 years. I know when a man is telling the truth." Keti pointed to the middle of his boat. There was a large pile of old, smelly fishing nets and some empty wooden crates. "Get in. Hide under the nets. The guards are checking the big ships, but they do not care about an old fisherman and his broken boat." Hori and Merit did not wait. They climbed into the small boat and lay down on the hard wood. Keti covered them with the heavy nets. The nets smelled strongly of fish and salt, but Hori did not mind. It was a good place to hide. "Where are you taking us?" Merit asked from under the nets. "To the middle of the river," Keti replied. "There are many small islands with tall grass. No one goes there. I will bring you some bread and dried fish. You can stay there until you decide what to do." Hori felt the boat move. Keti pushed it away from the pier with a long wooden pole. As they moved away from the city, Hori felt a little bit of hope. They were out of the temple, and they were out of the library. They were moving, and as long as they were moving, they were alive. Keti pushed the boat through the tall, green grass of a small island. The island was in the middle of the Nile, far from the busy docks of Thebes. The water was very quiet here. Birds with long legs stood in the mud, watching the boat move past. Keti stopped the boat and helped Hori and Merit stand up. "You are safe here for a few hours," Keti said. He reached into a small wooden box on the boat. He pulled out a piece of hard bread and 2 small, dried fish. Eat. You need your strength. The desert and the river are hard on the body. Hori took the food and thanked the old man. But he could not eat much. His mind was full of thoughts about the pharaoh. The pharaoh arrives in 7 days. Hori said to Merit, "We cannot stay on this island. We must go back to the city, but the guards know our faces." Merit looked at her clean, white dress. It was dirty now, but she still looked like a woman from the temple. "I can hide my hair with a scarf," she said. "But you, Hori, you have the face of a scribe. Your skin is too clean, and your hands do not have the marks of hard work." Hori looked at Keti's small clay stove at the back of the boat. There were some cold, black pieces of charcoal inside it. He picked up a piece of the black coal. It was dirty and left a dark mark on his fingers. "I will change my face," Hori said. He went to the edge of the boat and looked at his reflection in the water. He took the charcoal and began to rub it on his forehead and his cheeks. He made his skin look dark and dusty, like a man who worked all day in the hot sun. He used the charcoal to make his eyebrows thicker and joined them in the middle. He rubbed the dirt into the lines of his hands and under his fingernails. Then, he took a small knife and cut his long, neat hair. He made it look messy and uneven. He took off his fine linen tunic and traded it for an old, torn piece of cloth that Keti used to clean the boat. When he finished, he turned around. Merit gasped. She did not see the librarian anymore. She saw a poor, tired worker from the stone quarries. "You look like a different man," she whispered. "Good," Hori replied. "Now, we must do the same for you. We will go back to the city as workers. We will find a way to enter the new palace and see the trap for ourselves." Keti watched them with a sad smile. "The city is a dangerous place for a man who wears a mask. But you have a brave heart. Scribe, I will take you to the southern docks tonight. There are many workers there. The guards do not look at the faces of the poor." Hori looked at the black charcoal on his hands. He was no longer the man who wrote beautiful words on papyrus. He was a man of shadows now. He had to become a stranger to save his king. The sun began to go down again, and the sky turned a deep, dark red. Keti picked up his long wooden pole and pushed the boat away from the island. They moved slowly across the wide river toward the southern docks of Thebes. This part of the city was not like the beautiful temple area. It was a place for workers, traders, and heavy cargo. Keti reached a muddy bank near a group of tall wooden cranes. "This is the place," he whispered. "The guards do not come here often. Go now, and may the gods watch over you." Hori and Merit climbed out of the boat. Their feet sank into the cool, wet mud. They walked quickly toward the shadow of a large stone wall. Hori looked at Merit. Her face was hidden under a dark, dusty scarf. With his messy hair and charcoal-covered skin, he looked like a common laborer. "We must find information," Hori said quietly. "But we cannot go together. Two people walking together look suspicious. I will stay near the docks and listen to the workers. You go toward the residential streets. Find the house of Ameni, the architect. See if his family is safe." Merit nodded. "I know where his house is. It is near the southern gate. Be careful, Hori. If the guards stop you, do not speak too much. Your voice still sounds like a man of the library." They separated. Hori walked toward a group of men sitting around a small fire. They were eating bowls of hot lentil soup. He sat on a nearby stone and looked at the ground. He listened to their talk. They were complaining about the long hours at the new palace. They spoke about the high priest and the many guards that were now everywhere in the city. 3 hours passed. Hori felt cold and hungry. He watched the torches on the city walls. Finally, He saw a woman walking toward him from the shadows. It was Merit. She was walking fast, and her eyes were full of worry. Hori stood up and met her behind a stack of wooden crates. "What did you find?" he asked. Merit took a deep breath. She looked around to make sure no one was listening. "I found the house of a many," she said. "But the door was broken. I went inside. The rooms were empty. All of the furniture was turned over. There was no one there." "His family?" Hori asked. "He had a wife and an older brother." "They are gone," Merit replied. "A neighbor spoke to me from a window. She said the guards came in the middle of the night. They took Ameni's wife and his brother away in a closed cart. They did not say where they were going. The neighbor was very afraid. She said the guards told everyone to forget that Ameni ever lived there." Hori felt a wave of anger. They are using the family to keep the secret. Or maybe they are gone because they knew too much about Ameni's fears. "We must find them, Hori," Merit said. "If they are alive, they might have the last piece of the puzzle. Ameni might have told them where the secret path starts." Hori looked at the dark streets of the city. The mystery was getting deeper and more dangerous. Every person who knew the truth was disappearing. Hori and Merit moved away from the main streets. They walked toward a row of old warehouses near the edge of the city. These buildings were used to store grain and dry fish many years ago. Now, most of them were empty and broken. The air here was cold and smelled of dust and old salt. If the guards took them in a closed cart, they did not go to the temple. Hori said, "The temple is too busy. People would see them. They needed a quiet place where no one asks questions." They reached a large warehouse with a heavy wooden door. Hori noticed something on the ground. There were fresh tracks from a cart in the soft dirt. The tracks went directly to the back of the building. "Wait," Merit whispered. She pointed to a small, narrow window near the ground. "I see a flicker of light down there." They crawled to the window and looked inside. It was very dark, but they could see a small oil lamp on a stone floor. The room was below the ground. It was a cellar. Two people were sitting on a pile of straw. One was a woman with a tired face. The other was a man with grey hair and a short beard. These were the people Merit saw in the neighbor's description. Hori found a small wooden door at the side of the warehouse. It was not locked, but it was very heavy. He pushed it slowly. He and Merit stepped inside. They walked across the empty warehouse floor and found the wooden trapdoor to the cellar. Hori lifted the trapdoor. He looked down into the cellar. The woman and the man jumped up. They looked very afraid. The man held a small piece of wood like a weapon. "Do not be afraid," Hori said in a soft voice. "We are friends. We were friends of Ameni." The woman looked at Hori's charcoal-covered face. She did not recognize him, but she saw the kindness in his eyes. "Who are you?" she asked. Her voice was thin and shaking. "I am Hori the Scribe, and this is Merit," Hori replied. He climbed down the ladder into the cold cellar. Merit followed him. The woman sat back down on the straw. She began to cry quietly. "My name is Annie. I am the wife of Ameni. This is his brother, Beck. The guards brought us here 2 nights ago. They said we must stay here until the pharaoh arrives. They said if we talk to anyone, we will never see the sun again." Beck stood in front of the woman. "Why are you here? Are you with the high priest?" "No," Hori said. "The high priest is the one who killed Ameni. We are trying to stop him. We know about the trap in the palace. We know about the secret room." Beck's face changed. He put down the piece of wood. "Then you know the danger. Ameni told me everything before he died. He said the palace is not a home. It is a giant box of death. He was building it because they held us as prisoners. But he hid a secret map for me. He told me that if anything happened to him, I must find the scribe named Hori. Hori felt a shock of surprise. He knew my name. He said you were the only man in the library who looked at the old stones. Beck said. He knew you would see the truth. Hori sat on the cold stone floor of the cellar. The light from the small oil lamp made his shadow look very large on the wall. He reached into his leather bag and pulled out the golden ring he found in his desk. The red stone in the center glowed like a drop of blood in the dim light. The golden lion on the stone looked brave and strong. "Is this the ring you mentioned?" Hori asked. He held it up so Beck and Annie could see it. Annie gasped and covered her mouth with her hand. Beck moved closer, his eyes wide with surprise. He reached out a shaking hand but did not touch the gold. "Where did you find that?" Beck whispered. "That is the seal of the princess. She is the sister of the pharaoh. She is a powerful woman, and she is very loyal to her brother. I found it in my desk at the library." Hori explained. "The high priest put it there to make me look like a thief. But I think there is a bigger reason. Why does the high priest have the princess's ring?" Beck sat down on a wooden crate. He looked very tired. "Ameni saw that ring a week ago. He told me about it. He saw the high priest talking to a woman in a dark cloak near the construction site of the palace. The woman gave the high priest a letter and this ring. Ameni thought the woman was a servant of the princess. So, is the princess part of the plan to kill the pharaoh?" Merit asked. She looked at the ring with worry. Hori looked at the golden lion. "I do not think so. If the princess wanted to kill her brother, she would not give her own ring to the killer. That is too easy to find. I think the high priest stole this ring from her. He wants to use it to blame her for the murder. If the pharaoh dies and the princess is blamed, the high priest is the only person left to lead Egypt." Hori turned the ring over in his fingers. He noticed something small on the inside of the gold band. There were 3 tiny marks. They were not Egyptian letters. They looked like small mountains. "These marks," Hori said. "They are the same as the symbols on the gold coin and the blue jars. They are Hittite marks." Beck nodded slowly. Ameni said the high priest was working with people from the north. He said the foreign mercenary was the bridge between the high priest and the Hittite king. They want to break Egypt from the inside. They want the high priest to be a puppet king. "We have the evidence now," Merit said. "We have the ring, the map, and we have the testimony of Ameni's family. We must get this to the pharaoh." "But the pharaoh is still 3 days away," Hori reminded her. "And the city is full of guards looking for us. We cannot just walk to him." Hori put the ring back into his bag. He felt a new sense of purpose. He was no longer just running for his life. He was carrying the honor of a princess and the life of a king. Hori stood up, his mind racing. The cellar felt smaller now, the air thick with the weight of the conspiracy. They had the royal ring, the map, and the truth. But they were still trapped behind city walls. "We cannot wait for the pharaoh to reach the gates," Hori said, his voice firm. "By then, the trap will be set, and the high priest's men will be everywhere. We must reach the royal fleet while it is still on the river, before it reaches the docks of Thebes." Beck looked at the narrow window. The city is closed. The north and south gates are guarded by the high priest's personal soldiers. They are checking every cart, every basket of grain. Merit stepped forward, her eyes bright in the lamplight. "What about the hidden breaths? You said the old builders used tunnels to move stone. Is there one near the river?" Beck nodded slowly. "There is an old irrigation canal that runs under the warehouse district. It was built during the time of the great kings to move water to the palace gardens. It is narrow, dark, and filled with the mud of the Nile, but it leads to the marshes outside the city walls. It is a path for rats and ghosts. Beck warned, but it will take you past the guards. Hori looked at Annie and Beck. You cannot stay here. If the guards return and find us gone, they will kill you. You must come with us to the marshes. We will find a boat and head south to meet the pharaoh's barge. They moved quickly. Beck led them to the very back of the cellar, behind a stack of rotting grain sacks. He pushed aside a heavy stone slab, revealing a dark, square hole that smelled of damp earth and stagnant water. One by one, they lowered themselves into the narrow tunnel. Hori went last, pulling the stone slab back into place. The darkness was absolute. They had to move by touch, keeping their hands on the cold, slimy walls of the canal. The water was up to their knees, thick and slow-moving. As they crawled through the darkness, Hori felt the royal ring in his bag. It felt like it was burning against his side. He realized that the high priest hadn't just framed him. He had given Hori the only thing that could prove the truth to the royal guard. The ring was his shield, but only if he could reach the right person. After what felt like hours, the air began to change. The smell of the city, smoke and dust, was replaced by the fresh, sweet scent of the river reeds. The tunnel opened into a wide, marshy area thick with tall papyrus plants. They were outside the walls. Hori looked back at the silhouette of Thebes. The torches on the walls looked like tiny stars. He knew the high priest was somewhere up there, thinking he had won. Look, Merritt whispered, pointing toward the south. Far in the distance, a cluster of lights moved slowly on the water. It was not a fishing boat. The lights were large and steady, reflected in the mirror of the Nile. The pharaoh's fleet. Hori said, his heart leaping. We have 2 days of walking through the marshes to reach them. We must move tonight. The marshes were a world of emerald and shadow. Tall stalks of papyrus, some reaching twice the height of a man, swayed in the wind like the fans of the gods. The ground was a treacherous mix of soft mud and hidden pools. Every step was a battle against the earth itself. Hori led the way, his eyes scanning the water for more than just the path. Stay close. Hori whispered to the group. In the Shet, the river speaks in many voices. Some belong to the birds, but others belong to the Sobek, the crocodiles. The fear was a physical thing, sitting heavy in their chests. Annie was weak, her breath coming in ragged gasps, supported by Beck's strong arm. Merritt moved with surprising grace, her experience in the temple gardens helping her navigate the tangled roots. As the sun climbed higher, the heat became an enemy. The humidity felt like a wet cloth pressed against their faces. Hori stopped by a cluster of blooming lotus flowers to check his bag. The royal ring was safe, but the weight of it felt different now. It was no longer just evidence. It was a beacon. Look, Merritt said, pointing through a gap in the reeds. The pharaoh's fleet was closer now. The central ship, the royal barge, was a marvel of gold and cedar wood. Its sails were dyed a deep, royal purple, and the sun reflected off the great shield mounted on the prow. Smaller, faster galleys flanked it, their oars moving in perfect rhythm like the legs of a giant water insect. We cannot simply swim to them, Beck muttered, wiping sweat from his brow. The guards on those galleys are trained to shoot anything that moves in the water. To them, we are just assassins or thieves. I have a plan, Hori said, looking at the golden ring. But we need a boat. Not a fisherman's skiff, but something that can hold its own in the current. They searched the edge of the marshes for another hour until they found what they needed, an abandoned papyrus skiff, half-sunken and tangled in the weeds. It was small and fragile, but with a bit of work, it would float. Hori and Beck spent the next hour patching the hull with mud and dried reeds. their hands working with the frantic energy of desperate men. By the time the boat was ready, the fleet was almost level with their position in the river. Hori turned to Merit. "If we fail, if the guards fire before I can show the ring, you must take Annie and Beck and hide in the deep marshes." Hori said, his voice low, "We are not going to fail, Scribe." Merit replied, her eyes fierce, "You have the word of an architect and the ring of a princess. The gods are watching." They pushed the small boat into the open water. The current of the Nile caught them immediately, pulling them toward the center of the river. Hori took the single oar, steering them directly into the path of the lead galley. A horn blast suddenly echoed across the water, a deep, booming sound that signaled a warning. On the deck of the nearest galley, a row of archers stepped to the rail, their bows drawn and aimed directly at the small, mud-covered group in the reed boat. The air was thick with the scent of river mud and the metallic tang of fear. On the deck of the lead galley, the archers stood like statues, their bronze-tipped arrows pointed directly at Hori's chest. The rhythmic thumping of the oars stopped, and for a heartbeat, the only sound was the lapping of water against the papyrus hulls. "Cease your movement." A voice boomed from the galley's bridge. A man in polished leather armor and a high-crested helmet stepped forward. He was General Mentu, the veteran protector of the royal fleet. "You are in restricted waters. Identify yourselves or be returned to the mud of the Nile." Hori knew he had only seconds before the arrows flew. He stood up in the wobbling skiff, nearly losing his balance. He reached into his bag and pulled out the royal ring. He held it high, catching the midday sun. The red stone flared like a dying star, and the golden lion seemed to roar in the brilliant light. "I am Hori, scribe of the great library," he shouted, his voice cracking but firm. "I carry the seal of the princess and a message of life and death for the son of Ra. Look at the gold. General, would a common thief stand before your bows with the heart of the royal house in his hand?" Mentu's eyes narrowed. He signaled for a scout to bring him a copper looking-glass. He peered through it, his gaze fixing on the glint of the ring. A long, agonizing silence followed. The archers' fingers twitched on their bowstrings. "Lower your weapons," Mentu finally commanded. A ripple of confusion went through the guards, but they obeyed instantly. "Bring them aboard. If that ring is a fake, they will hang from the mast before the sun sets." A heavy rope ladder was tossed over the side of the galley. Hori helped Annie and Merit climb first, then followed with Beck. As they reached the deck, they were immediately surrounded by soldiers. The deck was clean, smelling of cedar and expensive oil, a sharp contrast to the filth of the marshes. General Mentu walked toward them, his heavy boots echoing on the wood. He was a man of scars and gray hair, with eyes that had seen 1,000 battles. He held out a gloved hand. Hori placed the ring into his palm. Mentu turned the ring over, his thumb tracing the tiny Hittite marks on the inner band that Hori had discovered in the cellar. His face went pale, a look of realization crossing his rugged features. "This is indeed the princess's seal," Mentu whispered, more to himself than to Hori. "But these marks, they are the signs of the north, the king of the Hittites. It is a betrayal from within, General," Hori said, stepping forward. "The high priest of Thebes has built a tomb in the new palace, a trap meant for the pharaoh. The ring was stolen to blame the princess, and an army of mercenaries waits in the hidden breaths to strike when the floor falls." Mentu looked from the ring to the mud-covered scribe. He saw the charcoal on Hori's face and the raw determination in Merit's eyes. He looked at the royal barge trailing behind them, where the pharaoh sat in bliss, unaware of the stone teeth waiting to swallow him. "You have brought a storm to my deck, Scribe," Mentu said, his voice grave. "If what you say is true, the heart of Egypt is already half broken. We must speak to the pharaoh, but we must do it without alerting the high priest's spies among the crew." General Mentu acted with the precision of a man who had survived a dozen palace coups. He did not lead Hori and his companions directly across the open gangplank to the royal barge. Instead, he ordered his men to drape a heavy linen canopy over a small supply boat, ostensibly to move sacred oils for the pharaoh's evening libations. Under the cloth, Mentu hissed, "Spies have eyes even in the rigging. If the high priest's observers on the shore see a group of mud-stained commoners boarding the king's ship, the signal to strike will be sent before we reach the docks." Hori, Merit, and Beck huddled in the darkness of the supply boat. The air was hot and smelled of incense. They felt the boat being rowed the short distance between the ships. Finally, they felt a gentle bump against the cedar hull of the royal barge. They were led through a side hatch into the lower quarters of the pharaoh's ship. Here, the walls were covered in thin sheets of beaten gold that shimmered in the lamplight. Musicians were playing soft harps somewhere above, the sound drifting down like a sweet dream. "Wait here," Mentu commanded, pointing to a small, windowless chamber. "I must prepare the Great One. He does not like his peace disturbed by tales of ghosts and falling floors." Minutes felt like hours. Hori paced the small room, his charcoal-stained fingers twitching. He looked at Merit, who was sitting with Annie. "If he doesn't believe us, Hori," she began, her voice trailing off, "he has to." Hori said, "The gold ring is the only key that fits this lock." Finally, the door opened. Mentu beckoned them forward. They entered the main cabin, a space of impossible beauty. On a throne of ebony and ivory sat the pharaoh, Merneptah. He looked younger than Hori expected, his face smooth and his eyes weary from the long journey. Beside him stood a woman of fierce beauty, her hair adorned with lapis lazuli. "My sister's ring," the woman whispered, stepping forward. This was the princess, the owner of the stolen seal. "General Mentu tells me a scribe from the dust of the library has found it." Hori knelt, pressing his forehead to the cool, polished floor. "Great One," he said, his voice echoing. The ring was a plant to frame the princess. "The high priest of Thebes has turned your new palace into a tomb. I have the drawings of the architect, Ameni, who was murdered to keep this secret." The pharaoh leaned forward, his gaze landing on the torn parchment Hori pulled from his bag, the note that spoke of the room under the feet of the gods. "My architect is dead?" the pharaoh asked, his voice low and dangerous. "They told me he retired to the countryside. He was poisoned with the blue lily oil." "Majesty," Hori said, looking up, "I found the jars. I found the Hittite gold. The floor of your throne room in Thebes is built to collapse. An army of mercenaries is already in the tunnels beneath the city, waiting for you to fall." The pharaoh looked at the princess, then back at Hori. A heavy silence filled the cabin, broken only by the rhythmic splash of the oars. The king stood up, his golden robes catching the light. "If this is true," the pharaoh said, "the high priest expects me to arrive in glory at the main docks. He expects me to walk into his house of eternity. Very well. We shall give him a grand arrival, but it will not be the one he has planned." The pharaoh Merneptah did not waste a single heartbeat. Under the cover of the velvet night, the royal barge slowed its pace. The grand fleet stayed on its course toward the main docks of Thebes, torches blazing and music playing to maintain the illusion of a peaceful arrival. But in the shadows of the riverbank, a smaller, silent drama was unfolding. "General Mentu," the pharaoh commanded, his voice like sharpening bronze, "take 300 of your finest braves of the king. They will not land at the docks. They will use the scribe's path, the irrigation canal and the hidden breaths." Hori stood before the map he had rescued from the library, now spread across a table of polished cedar. He pointed to the jagged lines representing the ancient tunnels. The mercenaries are concentrated here, in the north wall's basement. Hori explained, his finger tracing the route. If we enter through the canal Beck showed us, we can take them from behind before they even hear the pharaoh's horn at the palace gates. The princess stepped forward, her hand resting on the hilt of a small, jeweled dagger. And the high priest. He will be waiting on the dais, expecting my brother to walk across a floor of air. He must be confronted in the light of the sun, where all of Egypt can see his shame. I will be that shadow, Hori said, surprising even himself. I know the temple's secret passages better than any soldier. I can lead a small group to the mechanism that triggers the floor. If we lock it, the trap will fail. The plan was set. It was a gamble of the highest stakes. If Hori failed to reach the mechanism, the pharaoh would fall. If Mentu failed to neutralize the mercenaries, the city would become a slaughterhouse. The river of fire began not with flames, but with the silent movement of dark-clothed soldiers slipping into the water. Hori, now dressed in a soldier's simple leather kilt but still carrying his scribe's satchel, led the way back into the mouth of the irrigation canal. The air was thick and cold as they re-entered the city's underbelly. This time, however, Hori was not a fleeing rabbit. He was the guide for the king's lions. Behind him, the silent clink of bronze weapons replaced the sound of splashing mud. As they reached the junction where the canal met the palace foundations, a low vibration shook the stone. It was the sound of thousands of citizens cheering in the distance. The sun was rising. The pharaoh's public fleet had reached the docks. They are starting the ceremony, Hori whispered, his heart hammered against his ribs. We have minutes before the pharaoh enters the golden hall. He turned toward a narrow vertical shaft. This leads to the gear room. Follow me, and pray to Thoth that the wood hasn't been greased for the drop yet. The air in the vertical shaft was stagnant, smelling of old grease and the dry rot of cedar wood. Hori climbed first, his fingers gripping the rough-hewn stone of the palace foundations. Behind him, 3 of Mentu's elite guards moved with the silence of shadows. The distant roar of the crowd above grew louder, a rhythmic chanting that signaled the pharaoh was beginning his walk from the docks to the golden hall. They reached a narrow ledge and slipped through a gap in the masonry. Hori gasped. They were inside the heart of the machine, the hollow space directly beneath the throne room. Massive wooden beams, thick as the trunks of ancient oaks, held up the center of the hall. A complex system of ropes and heavy stone counterweights hung in the air like the web of a giant spider. If the main rope was cut, the weights would drop, and the floor above would swing downward into the house of eternity. There, Hori whispered, pointing to a raised platform. Standing by the main lever was the mercenary, the man with the cold eyes. He was not alone, for other foreign warriors stood with him, their bronze swords unsheathed. The mercenary held a torch in one hand and a sharp axe in the other. He was watching a small hole in the ceiling, waiting for the signal from the high priest above. When the high priest drops his staff, I cut the rope, the mercenary told his men. His voice was flat, devoid of emotion. Then we moved to the tunnels and let the high priest explain the tragedy to the people. Hori's blood ran cold. The guards behind him prepared to strike, but Hori held up a hand. The distance was too great. The mercenary could cut the rope before the guards reached the platform. I need to jam the main gear, Hori whispered to the lead guard. If the weights can't drop, the floor stays solid. You must distract them. Give me 30 seconds. The guards didn't hesitate. With a fierce cry, they vaulted over the stone ledge, weapons drawn. The mercenaries turned, caught by surprise. The sound of clashing bronze echoed through the hollow chamber. Hori didn't watch the fight. He dropped to his hands and knees and crawled toward the massive wooden wheel that controlled the tension of the ropes. He saw a pile of heavy stone chisels left behind by the builders. He grabbed the largest one and lunged toward the gears. Above, A sudden silence fell over the crowd. Then, the clear, piercing sound of a silver trumpet echoed through the palace. The pharaoh had entered the hall. Hori reached the gear. He jammed the stone chisel deep into the teeth of the wooden wheel just as he heard the high priest's voice from above, echoing through the floorboards. "Welcome, Great One. Step forward and claim the throne that the gods have prepared for you." Hori heard a thud. The high priest had dropped his staff. The mercenary on the platform let out a roar and swung his axe at the main rope. The rope snapped. The heavy stone weights groaned and began to drop. But then, the wooden gear Hori had jammed shuddered. The stone chisel held. The ropes went taut, vibrating with the massive weight. But the floor above did not move. "What?" The mercenary screamed, looking at the frozen machine. He turned and saw Hori, his face covered in charcoal and sweat, still holding the handle of the chisel. The man with the cold eyes raised his axe and charged. The mercenary moved with the speed of a desert cobra. He swung his heavy bronze axe in a wide arc, the blade whistling through the air. Hori, smaller and faster, dived between two massive wooden pillars. The axe slammed into the cedar wood, sinking deep. "You are just a scribe." The mercenary spat, struggling to yank the blade free. "You should have stayed with your ink pots." Hori scrambled to his feet, his eyes searching for anything he could use as a weapon. He wasn't a soldier, but he knew the physics of the machine he had just jammed. He saw the heavy stone counterweight, a massive block of granite, hanging just inches above the floor, held back only by the tension of the jammed gear. "And you?" Hori panted, his voice echoing in the hollow chamber. "Should have learned how a scribe thinks." Hori didn't charge the man. Instead, he grabbed a discarded builder's mallet and struck the stone chisel he had jammed into the gear. He didn't want to remove it. He wanted to shatter it. Above them, the Golden Hall was a place of frozen tension. The high priest stood on the dais, his face pale as he stared at the floor that refused to swallow the king. The pharaoh Merneptah didn't move. He stood exactly in the center of the trap, his hand resting on the hilt of his Khopesh sword. He looked directly into the high priest's eyes. "Is something wrong, priest?" The pharaoh asked, his voice a low, terrifying rumble. "You promised me a miracle. I am waiting." Back below, Hori's hammer struck the chisel a third time. The stone splintered. The massive wooden gear gave a sudden, violent jerk. The tension in the ropes shifted instantly. The mercenary finally freed his axe and lunged, but the shift in the machine's weight caused the platform beneath him to tilt. He stumbled, his boots sliding on the grease-covered wood. In that moment of imbalance, General Mentu's guards closed in. A bronze spear flashed in the lamplight, catching the mercenary in the shoulder. He fell back, his axe clattering into the darkness of the pit below. "Secure the ropes," Mentu's lead guard shouted. "If that gear breaks, the king falls." Hori didn't wait to see the end of the fight. He knew the mercenaries were defeated, but the real battle was now happening above his head. He found the small service ladder that led directly behind the great throne. He climbed, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. He pushed open the hidden panel and stepped out into the blinding light of the Golden Hall. The smell of incense was overpowering. Thousands of people, nobles, priests, and citizens, were watching in dead silence. Hori stepped from behind the throne, his face still covered in the black charcoal of the tunnels, his clothes torn and stained with mud. He looked like a ghost risen from the underworld. He held high the royal ring of the princess. "The trap is jammed, Majesty!" Hori shouted, his voice ringing through the vast hall. "The mercenaries are captured. The high priest's house of eternity is empty." The high priest backed away, his hands shaking. "This is a lie. This man is a thief. He stole the princess's ring." The ring was the proof you tried to hide." The princess said, stepping from the shadows near the entrance, her royal guard surrounding her. "And the architect you murdered has spoken from his grave." The pharaoh walked slowly off the trapdoor floor, his every step heavy and purposeful. He stopped inches from the high priest. He took the seal of the lion from Hori's hand and held it up for the entire city to see. "The gods have indeed spoken today," the pharaoh declared. "But they did not speak to you, priest. They spoke through a scribe who remembered the truth." The sun set over the great city of Thebes, painting the limestone walls of the palace in shades of deep violet and burning gold. The chaos of the morning had faded into a heavy, solemn peace. The Nile moved slowly, its waters carrying the stories of the day out to the great green sea. In the center of the golden hall, the pharaoh Merneptah sat upon his throne, this time on the solid stone of the dais, far from the hidden trap. The high priest stood before him, stripped of his white linen robes and his golden amulets. His head was bowed, not in prayer, but in the crushing weight of his own failure. "You sought to build a tomb for a king who still breathes," the pharaoh said, his voice cold and final. "By the laws of Marat, you have disturbed the balance of the world. You shall be taken to the mines of Kush, where you will spend the rest of your days digging in the earth you tried to turn into a weapon." The foreign mercenary and his men were led away in heavy bronze chains, destined for the desert outposts where they would never see the light of a city again. The fates of the just. As the guards cleared the hall, the pharaoh signaled for Hori and Merit to step forward. They had washed the charcoal and mud from their skin, but they still wore the simple clothes of the library and the garden. "You told me that curiosity is a dangerous thing," the pharaoh said, looking down at Hori. "But today, it was the only thing that saved the crown. A scribe's brush is often sharper than a general's sword." Hori bowed low. "The truth is like the sun. Majesty. It may be hidden by the clouds for a time, but it always returns to chase away the shadows." Later that night, Hori stood on the balcony of the great library. He held a new, clean roll of papyrus and a fresh reed pen. He looked out over the city he had saved. The mystery of the blue jars and the man with the cold eyes was over, but he knew that as long as men built palaces, there would be secrets hidden in the stone. He dipped his pen into the black ink and began to write the first words of the record. "This is the account of Ameni the architect, and the day the library of Thebes spoke the truth." The first week of Hori's life as the royal archivist was spent in the deep basements of the high priest's private villa. While the city celebrated the pharaoh's escape, Hori was surrounded by the smell of stagnant air and old ink. The high priest's wealth had been seized, but his secrets were still hidden within the mountains of papyrus he had left behind. Hori sat at a polished cedar table, illuminated by a single, high-quality lamp. He was looking for one specific thing: the financial record of the blue glass jars. If the high priest was working with the Hittites, there had to be a record of payment, not in Egyptian grain, but in something else. "You look for shadows in a room full of ghosts," Merit said, entering the room with a tray of dates and cool water. Her new role as chief overseer meant she wore finer linen now, but she still had the habit of checking the corners of the room for dust. "I found something, Merit," Hori said, his voice hushed. He pointed to a small, leather-bound book that had been hidden inside the hollow base of a statue of Anubis. "This is not a priest's ledger. It is a merchant's book, but the names in it are coded." He traced a line of text. Instead of names like Sipta or Ramos, the entries were marked with symbols: the falcon, the serpent, and the Iron King. "The falcon is the high priest," Hori explained. "The serpent was likely the mercenary. But look at the payments for the Iron King. They are massive. Quantities of gold, silver, and even more importantly, iron weapons from the north. These payments didn't stop with the high priest's arrest." Merit leaned over the table. If the falcon is in the mines of Kush, who is still paying the Iron King? Hori turned the page. The last entry was dated only 2 days ago. It mentioned a delivery to be made at the fortress of Zar, a lonely outpost on the edge of the Sinai desert. The high priest was just a banker. Hori realized, his heart sinking. He provided the gold and the location. But the true mastermind, the one who wants the pharaoh dead, is someone who can move goods through the desert without being questioned. Someone with military power. Suddenly, the heavy wooden door of the archive creaked open. Hori quickly slid the ledger into his satchel. A young messenger stood there, breathing hard. Archivist Hori. You must come to the palace at once. The boy panted. A Hittite envoy has arrived at the city gates. He claims he has a gift for the pharaoh to apologize for the misunderstandings of the mercenary. But the pharaoh refuses to see him without you by his side. Hori looked at Merit. The mystery was no longer a secret buried in Thebes. It was a bridge reaching out from the enemy's lands. Hori walked through the towering columns of the palace, his sandals clicking against the polished limestone. The air in the great hall of audience was thick with the scent of foreign spices and the heavy tension of an uneasy peace. Standing in the center of the hall was a man who looked entirely out of place in the sun-drenched city of Thebes. He was tall and broad-shouldered, wearing heavy robes of dark wool and a high, pointed cap, the traditional dress of the Hittite nobility. Behold, Lord Ketuwas of the Hittites. A palace herald announced, his voice echoing toward the rafters. The pharaoh Merneptah sat upon his throne, his face a mask of royal indifference. Beside him, Princess Nefertari watched the envoy with eyes as sharp as a desert hawk's. Hori took his place at the foot of the throne, clutching his scribe's palette. He felt the weight of the iron ledger hidden in the folds of his tunic. Lord Ketuwas bowed, though his eyes remained fixed on the pharaoh. Great king of the two lands. The envoy began, his Egyptian accented but clear. My master, the king of the north, is deeply grieved by the actions of the rogue mercenary who troubled your borders. He was a man of no nation, a wolf who served only himself. To prove our friendship, I bring a gift of peace. 4 Hittite servants stepped forward, carrying a massive chest made of dark ironwood and bound with shimmering silver bands. The wood was cold to the touch, and the craftsmanship was unlike anything produced in the workshops of Egypt. Open it. The pharaoh commanded. The lid was lifted, and a collective gasp went through the court. Inside lay a suit of armor made of a metal that shimmered with a dull, blue-black light. It was not bronze. It was iron, the rare and precious metal of the north, stronger than any Egyptian spear. Alongside it sat a long sword, its edge so sharp it seemed to cut the very light in the room. Iron to protect the son of Ra. Ketuwas said with a thin smile, and a promise that our borders shall remain quiet. Hori stepped forward, his heart racing. He didn't look at the sword. He looked at the silver bands on the chest. He leaned down, pretending to inspect the quality of the wood. There, etched into the corner of the silver, was a tiny symbol, a mountain peak with a sun rising behind it. It was the exact same mark as the Iron King in the High Priest's secret ledger. Hori looked up at the envoy. Ketuwas was watching him, his expression unreadable. For a moment, their eyes locked. Hori saw a flash of recognition in the Hittite's gaze, a realization that this scribe was more than just a man of ink and paper. The craftsmanship is indeed rare. Majesty, Hori said, his voice steady. But such a chest is heavy. It must have taken a specific route through the desert to arrive so quickly. Perhaps through the fortress of Zar. The envoy's smile didn't falter, but his hands tightened on his belt. We took the sea route to the delta. Scribe, the desert is no place for such precious cargo. Hori knew he was lying. The ledger had mentioned a delivery at Zar only days ago. The gift was not an apology. It was a signal. The Iron King was moving his pieces into the heart of the palace, and he was doing it with the pharaoh's permission. As the envoy was led away to his guest quarters, the pharaoh turned to Hori. "You found something, archivist. I saw it in your eyes. The piece they offer is forged in the same fire as the mercenary's sword." "Majesty," Hori replied, "we are being watched, even now." The moon hung low over the palace, casting long, skeletal shadows across the stone floors of the royal armory. Hori had waited until the changing of the guard to slip inside. He wasn't alone. Merit waited in the shadows of the entrance, her hand resting on a small pruning knife she had brought from the gardens. "Are you sure about this, Hori?" she whispered, her eyes darting toward the torchlight in the hallway. "If we are caught tampering with a diplomatic gift, even the pharaoh might not be able to protect us." "The ledger doesn't lie, Merit," Hori replied, his voice barely audible. "The Hittites don't give away iron for free. This metal is more than a gesture of peace. It's a message I haven't decoded yet." He approached the ironwood chest. The iron armor and the long sword sat on a velvet pedestal. In the dark, the metal didn't reflect the moonlight. It seemed to swallow it. Hori pulled a small vial of acidic lemon juice and a scrap of fine linen from his bag, tools of a scribe used for cleaning old papyrus. Hori leaned over the long sword. He carefully applied a single drop of the juice to the base of the hilt. As the liquid touched the iron, it didn't just sit there. It began to bubble slightly, releasing a faint, sharp odor that Hori recognized instantly. "Smell that," Hori whispered. "It's not just iron. It's been treated with galena and a rare resin from the northern mountains. This sword isn't meant for combat." "Then what is it for?" Merit asked, stepping closer. Hori didn't answer. He picked up the sword. It was surprisingly light, but as he turned it in his hands, he felt a slight shift in the weight, a tiny, internal movement that suggested the blade was hollow. He tapped the pommel with a small copper rod. Instead of a solid ring, the metal produced a dull, vibrating thud. "It's a carrier," Hori realized. "The blade is a vessel. They didn't just bring iron into the palace, they brought something inside the iron." Before he could investigate further, a floorboard creaked behind them. Hori and Merit froze. A shadow moved near the heavy oak doors, a figure dressed in the dark, pleated robes of a Hittite attendant. It was the man who had stood closest to Lord Ketua's during the audience. The attendant didn't shout. He didn't call the guards. Instead, he pulled a thin, curved dagger from his sleeve. The metal of his blade was dark, identical to the iron on the pedestal. "The scribe is too curious," the man said, his voice a low hiss. "Curiosity in Thebes is a disease. I am here to provide the cure." Merit didn't hesitate. She grabbed a heavy bronze shield from a nearby rack and swung it with all her strength. The shield hit the attendant's arm just as he lunged. The iron dagger skittered across the floor, sparking against the stone. Hori scrambled back, grabbing the long sword from the pedestal. Even if it was hollow, it was still a length of iron. He pointed the tip at the assassin. "The pharaoh's guards are 10 paces away." Hori lied, his voice steady despite the hammering of his heart. "If you kill us, you die within these walls, and your king's peace dies with you." The assassin paused, his eyes flickering toward the door. He heard the distant rhythmic march of the night patrol. With a curse in his native tongue, he backed into the shadows and vanished through a side servant's entrance. Hori looked down at the hollow sword in his hand. He noticed a small, hairline seam near the crossguard. He twisted it, and with a soft click, the hilt unscrewed. A thin, tightly rolled cylinder of charcoal-black papyrus slid out. "It's not an army they brought into the palace," Hori whispered, unrolling the paper. "It's a list of names." Hori and Merit didn't wait for the assassin to return with reinforcements. They slipped out of the armory, moving through the servant corridors where the scent of baking bread was already beginning to rise from the palace kitchens. They didn't stop until they reached the small, secluded scriptorium Hori had claimed as his own, a room filled with the comforting smell of old cedar and dried ink. With trembling hands, Hori lit a small oil lamp. The flame danced, casting long, nervous shadows across the walls. He spread the charcoal-black papyrus on his desk. The ink was a pale, shimmering silver, likely made from crushed minerals found only in the northern mountains. It was designed to be invisible in the harsh Egyptian sun, readable only by the soft glow of a lamp. "What does it say, Hori?" Merit asked, her voice barely a whisper. She stood by the door, her eyes fixed on the hallway. Hori adjusted his spectacles. The script was not in the formal hieroglyphs of the court, nor the flowing hieratic of the scribes. It was a coded shorthand, a mixture of Hittite symbols and Egyptian trade signs. The list of the Iron King, the Weaver, 3 shipments of grain redirected to the fortress of Zar. The Cupbearer prepared the blue lily for the great sleep. The Gatekeeper authorized the passage of the Iron Gift. The Shadow of the Throne provided the architectural seals for the House of Eternity. Hori felt a cold sweat prickle his neck. This isn't just a list of names, Merit. It's a record of service. The high priest wasn't the leader. He was just the weaver. He provided the resources. But look at this last one. The Shadow of the Throne. Who fits that description? Merit asked, stepping closer to the desk. Hori traced the symbol next to the entry. It was a stylized lotus, but with a sharp, downward-pointing leaf. This is the personal seal of Vizier Rahotep. He is the pharaoh's closest advisor. He is the man who manages the laws, the taxes, and the royal seals. He is the one who would have given Ameni the final orders for the palace construction. The realization hit them like a physical blow. If the vizier was the shadow of the throne, then the conspiracy went right to the heart of the Egyptian administration. The high priest had been the public face of the plot, a convenient shield to be discarded once his usefulness was over. But Rahotep was the true architect of the plan. "If we take this to the pharaoh now," Merit said, her brow furrowed in thought, "Rahotep will simply say it's a Hittite plant. He will claim the envoy brought it to sow discord among the king's advisors. We need more than just a list on a foreign scroll. We need a physical link." Hori looked at the entry for the gatekeeper. The gatekeeper authorized the passage of the Iron Gift. That means the records at the fortress of Zar will have the vizier's signature. Not a fake seal, but a direct order. Zar is days away by chariot. Merit noted. "Then we don't have much time." Hori replied, rolling up the black papyrus. "The assassin knows we have the list. Rahotep will know within the hour. We can't stay in the palace. We have to become the shadows ourselves." He grabbed a fresh piece of papyrus and scribbled a quick, coded note for the princess. He didn't dare send it through the official messengers. He tucked it into the collar of a small, stray palace cat that often visited his scriptorium for scraps. It was a long shot, but the cat knew its way to the princess's private garden. "Pack only what you can carry," Hori told Merit. "We're going to the desert. We're going to find the paper trail at Zar before Rahotep can burn it." The transition from the lush, green banks of the Nile to the harsh, unforgiving edge of the eastern desert was abrupt. Hori and Merit had slipped out of Thebes under the cover of the pre-dawn mist, disguised as humble merchants traveling with a small caravan of salt traders. Hori's fine linen was gone, replaced by a coarse, sand-colored tunic and a heavy woolen cloak that smelled of smoke and sweat. As the sun began its ascent, the heat rose from the earth in shimmering waves. The fortress of Zar sat on the very edge of Egypt's eastern border, a gateway to the Sinai and the path the Hittite envoys must have taken. To reach it, they had to cross the Red Land, a place where the gods of chaos were said to roam. "How far do you think the vizier's reach extends?" Merit asked, her face partially hidden by a linen scarf to shield her from the grit. She was leading a small donkey laden with what looked like bags of salt, but beneath the white crystals lay Hori's precious ink, blank scrolls, and the black papyrus. "Rahotep is the vizier of the south and north," Hori replied, his voice dry. "Every governor, every captain of the guard, and every tax collector answers to him. But out here, in the sand, his power is only as good as the silver he pays. The men at Zar are soldiers, not politicians. They follow the paper trail." Hori looked back at the distant silhouette of Thebes. He felt a pang of guilt for leaving the pharaoh unprotected, but he knew a scribe's only weapon was the truth. Without the signed orders from Zar, they were just 2 more bodies for the desert to swallow. The fugitives' inventory. To survive the trek and the mission, Hori had carefully curated their supplies. In the desert, a single mistake was a death sentence. 4 water skins, filled with Nile water, treated with a drop of wine to keep it fresh. Dried figs and barley bread. Rations meant to last 5 days. The black papyrus, hidden inside a hollowed-out piece of salt rock. Scribe's kit. Charcoal, red and black ink, and a small copper knife. A bronze dagger, given to Merit by a friendly stable hand before they fled. By the second day, the caravan of salt traders turned north, leaving Hori and Merit to navigate the final stretch to Zar alone. The silence of the desert was absolute, broken only by the crunch of sand beneath their sandals. However, the silence was a lie. Hori stopped, his ears straining. In the distance, muffled by the dunes, was the unmistakable sound of rhythmic pounding. It wasn't the wind. It was the sound of chariot wheels. "They're coming for us," Hori whispered. He grabbed the donkey's lead and pulled it toward a jagged outcrop of rock. Rahotep didn't wait for us to reach the fortress. He sent the royal charioteers. "We can't outrun horses on foot, Hori," Merit said, her eyes wide with alarm. "We don't have to outrun them," Hori said, his mind racing through the old military records he had once catalogued. "This part of the road is narrow, flanked by the Devil's Teeth, sharp limestone ridges. If we can get them into the soft sand of the gully, the wheels will sink." As the first chariot appeared on the horizon, a golden flash against the red dust, Hori realized this was no longer a game of ledgers and ink. It was a race against the very power he had once served. The golden flash on the horizon grew into 2 distinct shapes. These were not common border scouts. They were Medjay, the elite royal police, driving the light, 2-wheeled chariots of the pharaoh's personal guard. The sun glinted off their bronze breastplates and the scales of their leather armor. They were moving at a terrifying speed, the horses' hooves kicking up a screen of red dust that trailed behind them like a dragon's tail. "Into the gully, Merit. Now!" Hori shouted over the rising wind. They scrambled down the steep, rocky slope into the narrow pass known as the Devil's Teeth. The ground here was deceptive. On the surface, it looked like cracked clay, but beneath the crust lay a deep, treacherous layer of powder sand, fine as flour and impossible for wheels to navigate. Hori knew the design of the Egyptian chariot perfectly. He had spent months cataloguing the technical drawings in the Great Library. They were marvels of engineering, lightweight, flexible, and built for the high-speed pursuit of enemies on the hard-packed plains of the Delta. But their thin, wooden wheels were their greatest weakness in the shifting belly of the desert. "Hide the donkey behind that ridge," Hori commanded. He grabbed a heavy woolen blanket from their pack and began frantically smoothing over their tracks leading into the deep sand, while Merit pulled the animal into the shadows of a limestone overhang. The roar of the wheels grew deafening. The first chariot crested the ridge of the gully. The driver, a man with a scarred face and the cold eyes of a career killer, didn't hesitate. He saw Hori standing in the center of the pass and lashed his whip. "Stop, Scribe!" The Medjay roared. "The vizier demands your return." The horses plunged into the gully. For the first few meters, the chariot held its speed. But as the weight of the vehicle hit the powder sand, the transition was violent. The thin wheels didn't roll. They sank. The chariot lurched forward as the axle hit the sand. One horse stumbled, its legs caught in the powdery trap. The sudden halt sent the driver and the archer flying forward over the screen. They landed in the soft dunes. The second chariot, following too closely, tried to swerve, but its left wheel struck a jagged limestone tooth protruding from the ground. The wood splintered, and the vehicle flipped, spilling its occupants into the dust. The desert does not care about the vizier's seals. Hori whispered, his heart hammering in his ears. One of the soldiers scrambled to his feet, his face covered in red grit. He reached for his khopesh, but the weight of his armor made every movement a struggle in the deep sand. He looked at Hori, a mere scribe, dusty and disheveled, and saw the calm intelligence that had just dismantled an elite unit without drawing a sword. "We have to move," Merit urged, grabbing Hori's arm. "They'll have more men behind them, and they'll be on foot next time." They didn't stay to watch the soldiers struggle with their fallen horses. Hori and Merit climbed the opposite side of the gully, leading their donkey through the rocks where no chariot could follow. The fortress of Zar was now only a few hours away, but the sun was beginning to dip. In the desert, the cold of the night was often more lethal than the heat of the day. The fortress of Zar loomed out of the twilight like a jagged crown of sun-baked brick. It sat upon the only high ground for leagues, overlooking the ancient road that led toward the Sinai and the lands of the north. Its walls were thick, reinforced with heavy cedar beams and topped with a forest of bronze-tipped spears. This was the throat of Egypt. Everything that entered or exited the eastern borders had to pass through its narrow maw. As Hori and Merit approached, the wind began to howl, carrying the sharp, cold bite of the desert night. They no longer looked like merchants. They looked like survivors of a shipwreck in a sea of sand. Their donkey was limping, and their water skins were dangerously light. "Halt!" A voice rang out from the ramparts. A torch flared above, illuminating a row of archers. "The gates are closed until the sun returns. Turn back or face the arrows." Hori stepped forward, pulling the hood of his cloak back. He didn't hide his face this time. He stood as tall as his tired legs would allow. "I am Hori, royal archivist and keeper of the king's secrets," he shouted, his voice echoing against the stone. "I travel on the pharaoh's business. Open the gates, or you will answer to the son of Ra himself." There was a long silence from above. The soldiers whispered among themselves. Finally, the heavy wooden crossbar groaned, and the massive copper-plated gates swung open just enough to let them through. Inside, the fortress smelled of wood smoke, roasted onions, and the metallic tang of sharpened bronze. They were immediately surrounded by 10 soldiers led by a man with a thick beard and eyes that had seen too many sandstorms. This was Captain Parahotep, the commander of Zar. "You have the look of a man who has been chased by demons, Scribe," the captain said, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword. "The royal archivist should be in a palace of gold, not wandering the Red Land with a single donkey." "The demons I flee wear the vizier's seals, Captain," Hori replied, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous tone. He pulled out the bronze cylinder that held his official appointment. "I am here to inspect the border ledgers. I have reason to believe that illegal shipments have passed through this gate, shipments that threaten the life of the pharaoh." The captain's expression hardened. He looked at Merit, then back at Hori. "The vizier sent a messenger bird this morning," he said quietly. "He said a rogue scribe had stolen a royal treasure and was heading for the border. He ordered us to detain you and hold you in the pits until his men arrived." Merit's hand went to the hidden knife in her belt, but Hori remained still. "If I were a thief, would I come to the most heavily guarded fort in the desert? Hori asked. The treasure I carry is the truth. The vizier wants me stopped because the records in your own archive will prove he is a traitor. Parahotep looked toward the dark horizon, where the dust from the Medjay chariots might still be settling. He was a borderman, far from the politics of the court. But he knew that in Egypt, the winds could change in a single afternoon. The archives are in the North Tower. The captain finally said, I will give you until midnight to find what you seek. If you find nothing, I must obey the vizier's order. My men will be at the door. Do not try to leave. Hori nodded. Midnight is more than enough time for a man who knows how to read the shadows. The North Tower of Zar was a narrow stone cylinder that seemed to trap the heat of the day long after the sun had vanished. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of old papyrus, dry rot, and the sharp, metallic scent of the oil lamps. Rows of wooden cubicles lined the walls, stuffed with thousands of scrolls, the boring, daily heartbeat of a border fortress. We have 3 hours, Hori, Merritt whispered, her eyes tracking the flickering shadows on the ceiling. Outside the heavy oak door, the rhythmic spear taps of the guards reminded them that they were prisoners in all but name. Hori didn't answer. He was already moving with the practiced efficiency of a man who had spent his life among the stacks. He didn't look at the recent logs first. Instead, he went to the section of the Great Seals, where the high-level directives from Thebes were stored. The iron gift passed through here 10 days ago, Hori muttered, his fingers dancing over the labels. But it wouldn't be listed as iron. Rahotep is too clever for that. He would call it something else, something common. He pulled a heavy, dust-covered scroll from a mid-level shelf. It was the log of the Eastern Gate. He unrolled it across a small, slanted desk. Month of harvest. Day 12. 40 jars of oil for the Sinai Scouts. Month of harvest. Day 14. 12 crates of white stone for the palace masonry. Month of harvest. Day 15. 4 heavy chests of sacred statues. Diplomatic gift from the north. There, Hori said, his finger stabbing at the entry for day 15. Statues don't require iron-bound chests, and they certainly don't require direct authorization from the vizier's office for a closed inspection. He flipped the scroll over to look at the authorization attached to the back. There, stamped in dark red wax, was the seal of the vizier. But Hori's eyes widened as he looked closer. He pulled a small magnifying glass made of polished quartz from his kit. It's not just the seal, Merritt, Hori whispered, his voice trembling with a mix of fear and triumph. Look at the ink of the signature. Rahotep always uses a specific blend of soot and burnt bone that gives a slight blue sheen. But look here, under the light. He tilted the lamp. The signature didn't have a blue sheen. It had a faint, shimmering silver tint. The same mineral ink found on the black papyrus inside the hollow sword. The vizier isn't just working with the Hittites, Hori realized. He is using their own secret ink to communicate with the border guards. This isn't just a signature. It's a coded command to the gatekeeper mentioned in the list. Suddenly, the sound of heavy hooves and shouting erupted from the courtyard below. Hori ran to the narrow slit window. Through the darkness, he saw the torches of at least a dozen riders. They weren't the broken Medjay from the gully. These were fresh, armored soldiers, and at their head rode a man in a purple-bordered tunic. The vizier's personal secretary, Hori said, his face turning pale. They are here early. They aren't going to wait for the captain to hand us over. Hori grabbed the scroll and shoved it into his bag. He had the physical link, but the Tower of Whispers was about to become a cage. The sound of the heavy iron shod hooves stopped abruptly in the courtyard. Hori watched from the slit window as a man dismounted with practiced elegance. This was Seneb, the vizier's personal secretary. In the hierarchy of the palace, Seneb was the vizier's shadow, a man who lived in the details of taxes, executions, and whispers. He didn't carry a sword, but the scroll in his hand was more dangerous than any bronze blade. "Captain Parahotep." Seneb's voice carried through the dry night air, shrill and demanding. "By order of the vizier, you are to hand over the fugitives immediately. They are to be bound and blinded for transport back to Thebes." Hori turned to Merit. Her face was set in a mask of grim determination. He said, "Blinded. Hori, they don't want us to see where we're going. Or perhaps they just don't want us to see the sun again." "We can't go down the stairs," Hori said, looking at the heavy oak door. The spears of the guards outside were already shifting. The captain was a man of the border, but Seneb carried the direct authority of the throne's second most powerful man. Hori looked around the cramped archive. His eyes landed on the heavy wooden pulleys used to lift crates of scrolls from the lower levels. It was a simple system of thick hemp ropes and cedar beams. "The pulley," Hori whispered. "It leads to the storage room near the outer wall. If we can drop fast enough, we can reach the stables before Seneb takes control of the gates." The secretary's ultimatum. Below, the confrontation reached a boiling point. Seneb held up a papyrus with the vizier's grand seal. The charge: high treason and theft of royal seals. The command: immediate custody of Scribe Hori and the woman Merit. The penalty for obstruction: stripping of rank and imprisonment for the captain. "Captain, look at the signature." Hori yelled down from the window, a desperate gamble to sow doubt. "The ink is silver. It is the mark of the north. The vizier has betrayed the pharaoh." Seneb looked up, his narrow face contorting in rage. "Ignore the lies of a condemned man. Guards, break down the door." The first blow hit the oak door. Hori didn't wait. He grabbed a thick leather strap used for bundling scrolls and looped it over the pulley rope. "Hold on to me, Merit," he commanded. He kicked the brake lever. The rope hissed as it began to slide. They dropped into the darkness of the shaft just as the door to the archive splintered open. The sensation of falling was terrifying, a stomach-churning plunge through the scent of dust and old paper. Hori used his gloves to slow their descent, the friction burning through the leather. They hit the floor of the storage room with a jarring impact. Hori didn't stop to catch his breath. He pulled the evidence scroll tight against his chest and led Merit through a side door into the hay-scented dimness of the stables. Most of the horses were agitated by the arrival of the new soldiers, but in the far stall, their own tired donkey watched them with bored eyes. Next to it stood a magnificent charcoal-grey stallion. The mount Seneb had just arrived on. "We take the horse," Hori said, reaching for the reins. "A scribe on a donkey is a target. A scribe on a vizier's horse is a ghost." The grey stallion, a beast of pure blood and iron nerves, snorted as Hori's trembling hands gripped its bridle. This was a royal runner, an animal bred in the delta specifically for the vizier's personal couriers. It was built for speed, not for the heavy labor of the desert. But at this moment, speed was the only currency Hori had left. "I have never ridden anything faster than a Nile ferry," Hori whispered, his heart hammering against his ribs. He helped Merit onto the animal's broad back first, then hoisted himself up behind her. The horse shifted, sensing the amateur grip of a scribe rather than the firm hand of a master. "Just hold on to the manere, Hori," Merit urged. "And don't look back." Outside the stable, the fortress was a storm of noise. Shouts echoed from the north tower, and the rhythmic soldiers running across the wooden gangways signaled that their escape had been discovered. Seneb's voice, shrill with panicked fury, rose above the din. "Seal the gates. Kill the horse if you must, but bring me the scribe." Hori kicked his heels into the stallion's flanks. The horse didn't just move, it exploded forward. They burst out of the stable doors, scattering a group of surprised kitchen servants. The main gate was already beginning to groan shut, the massive copper-plated timbers moving slowly like the jaws of a giant. "Faster!" Merit cried. Hori leaned forward, pressing his face into the horse's neck. The grey stallion surged. They cleared the threshold of the gates just as the wood slammed shut behind them with a bone-shaking boom. A few stray arrows hissed through the air, one grazing Hori's shoulder and tearing his tunic, but the darkness of the desert swallowed them before the archers could find their mark. The secretary's saddlebags. Once they were a safe distance from the fortress, hidden in the lee of a massive sand dune. Hori slowed the horse to a walk. His hands were raw from the reins, and his legs felt like lead. But as the horse calmed, Hori noticed the heavy leather panniers draped over the animal's haunches. Seneb had been so hurried to confront the captain that he hadn't unloaded his personal effects. Hori reached into the bags, his fingers brushing against silk and metal. He pulled out several items that had traveled directly from the vizier's private chambers. A silver stylus, used for writing on wax tablets, engraved with the Hittite mountain symbol. A map of the delta, marked with red ink at 3 specific points, the hidden granaries. A sealed cylinder, made of blue glass, identical to the jars Hori had found in the temple gardens. He didn't just come to catch us, Hori realized, holding the blue cylinder up to the moonlight. Seneb was on a delivery run. These jars, they aren't just for poison. Look at the weight. He unscrewed the cap of the blue cylinder. It wasn't oil inside. It was a fine, shimmering dust, powdered lapis lazuli mixed with sulfur. It's a signal powder, Merit whispered, recognizing the mixture from her work with temple incense. When burned, it creates a pillar of brilliant blue fire that can be seen for miles across the flat plains. They aren't just planning an assassination, Hori. They're planning a coordinated strike across the entire delta. Hori looked at the map. The red marks weren't just granaries. They were the locations of the pharaoh's largest military garrisons. If blue fire rose from those spots, the Hittite navy waiting in the Mediterranean would know exactly when the Egyptian defense had been crippled from within. The mystery had grown from a single murder in a garden to a map of a burning empire. Hori gripped the reins tighter. They couldn't go back to Thebes. The vizier held the city. They had to go north, to the sea, to stop the fire before it was lit. The desert's dry heat began to give way to the heavy, humid breath of the Nile delta. As the grey stallion galloped north, the barren red dunes were replaced by the lush green of papyrus marshes and the dark, fertile soil known as the Kemet. The smell of salt from the distant Mediterranean mingled with the scent of wet earth and ripening grain. Hori's body was a map of aches, but the adrenaline of the discovery kept him upright. "We are nearing the first red mark on Seneb's map," he shouted over the wind. "The garrison at Pyrameses. If the vizier has a man there, that's where the first blue signal will rise." Merit clung to his waist, her eyes scanning the horizon. "We look like thieves on a stolen horse, Hori. How do we stop a military garrison without being arrested on sight?" "We don't go to the garrison," Hori replied, slowing the horse to a trot as they approached a network of irrigation canals. "We find the signal point." Seneb's map shows a watchtower of the 2 herons just outside the city walls. It's high, isolated, and commands a view of the coast. They dismounted near a cluster of willow trees, the grey stallion lathered in foam. Hori led the horse into the water to cool its legs while he unrolled the vizier's map. The 3 red marks formed a perfect triangle. If the blue fire was lit at the watchtower of the 2 herons, it would be seen by the second point at the mouth of the Canopic branch, which would then signal the Hittite fleet. "It's a chain of fire," Hori whispered. "If we break the first link, the fleet stays in the dark." He pulled the blue glass cylinder from his bag. The powder inside was volatile. He knew from his chemistry scrolls that sulfur and lapis, while beautiful, were a violent combination when met with a spark. "We need to replace this powder with something else," Hori said, a glint of his old scribe's wit returning. "Something that looks like lapis but won't catch the light. Merit, do you have any of the indigo dye seeds from the garden stores?" Merit reached into her pouch, producing a small handful of dried, dark blue seeds. They produce a thick, black smoke when burned, not a bright flame. It's used to drive pests away from the vines. Perfect, Hori said. Black smoke in the night is invisible. The second tower will see nothing, and the Iron King will be left waiting for a signal that never comes. They reached the base of the watchtower just as the first stars began to pierce the velvet sky. It was a lonely stone finger pointing at the heavens. A single guard stood at the top, his silhouette sharp against the rising moon. Hori checked his dagger. Stay with the horse, Merit. If I'm not back by the time the moon reaches the zenith, ride to the city and find the local governor. Tell him the shadow is coming. I'm not staying behind, Hori, she said, her voice firm. You're a scribe, not a climber. You'll need someone to watch the stairs. The climb was a grueling ascent up a narrow, external stone staircase that spiraled around the tower's mud-brick exterior. The wind from the Mediterranean whipped at their tunics, threatening to pull them into the dark marshes below. Hori's heart hammered a frantic rhythm against his ribs. He was a man of the library, used to the silence of scrolls, not the vertical peril of a watchtower. Quiet, Merit breathed, her hand catching his elbow as they reached the final landing. Above them, through a trapdoor, came the sound of a flint striking stone. Then, the smell of a smoldering wick. Hori peered through a crack in the wood. A lone man, dressed in the leather kilt of a mid-level officer but wearing the distinctive silver signet ring of the vizier's inner circle, was leaning over a large bronze brazier. Next to the brazier sat 3 jars, not of blue glass, but of heavy ceramic, already filled with the powdered lapis and sulfur. The officer held a torch, waiting for a specific star to align with the tower's peak. He's waiting for the zenith, Hori whispered. We have seconds. Hori didn't have a plan for a physical fight, but he had the indigo seeds. He pulled a small, heavy inkstone from his bag, the one he had used for 10 years to grind his charcoal. He signaled Merit to grab the other side of the trapdoor. On the count of 3, they threw the door open. The officer spun around, his torch flare illuminating a look of pure shock. Before he could draw his sword, Hori hurled the heavy inkstone with all his might. It struck the bronze brazier, tipping it over. The volatile blue powder spilled across the stone floor, mercifully away from the officer's torch. The scribe. The officer roared, recognizing Hori from the vizier's most wanted descriptions. He lunged with his bronze khopesh. Merit didn't wait. She threw the handful of indigo seeds directly into the officer's torch. The reaction was instant. Instead of a bright flame, the torch erupted in a thick, choking cloud of oily black smoke. The officer coughed, blinded by the sudden soot, and stumbled back. Hori scrambled toward the fallen jars. He grabbed the officer's discarded torch and used it to ignite a small pile of the spilled lapis powder on the far side of the roof, nowhere near the signal brazier. A brilliant flash of blue light flared for a second, then died. What are you doing? Merit coughed through the black smoke. I'm giving him the signal he wants, but in the wrong place. Hori shouted. In the distance, across the flat marshland, a tiny spark of light appeared on the horizon. The second tower had seen the accidental flash and was already lighting its own fire. But because Hori's flash was brief and out of position, the chain was broken. The second tower signaled danger, not attack. The officer lunged again, but the black smoke was too thick. He tripped over the lip of the tower and fell toward the internal stairs. Hori didn't stay to see if he got up. The second tower is signaling abort. Hori realized, watching the distant orange flame flicker in a jagged pattern. The Hittite fleet will think the trap has been discovered. They won't sail tonight. But as they descended the stairs, a new sound chilled Hori's blood. From the direction of the city, a horn blast echoed, the deep, resonant call of the vizier's personal guard. They saw the black smoke, Merit said, her voice trembling. They're coming. The sound of the vizier's guard was no longer a distant echo. It was a rhythmic pounding of hooves and the clatter of scale armor against bronze shields. Looking down from the base of the tower, Hori saw the torches, dozens of them, snaking through the darkness like a fiery serpent. "The horse!" Hori cried, pointing toward the cluster of willow trees where they had left the grey stallion. But even as they ran, Hori realized the futility. A royal runner was built for the open road, not the treacherous, waterlogged maze of the delta marshes. If they stayed on the horse, the guards would trap them against a canal within minutes. "Into the reeds, Hori. The water is our only shield." Merritt pulled him toward the edge of a deep irrigation channel where the papyrus grew thick and tall, their plume-like heads swaying in the salt-heavy breeze. They waded into the water. It was waist-deep and cold, the mud at the bottom sucking at their sandals like the hands of the drowned. They moved as silently as they could, pushing through the dense stalks of green gold. Behind them, they heard the guards arrive at the tower. Shouts of "Where is the scribe?" and "Check the stairs" rang out over the marshes. "If they find the stallion, they'll know we're on foot." Merritt whispered, her breath hitching as a large water bird took flight nearby, its wings slapping the surface of the water. Hori held his satchel above his head, protecting the evidence scroll and the blue glass cylinder. "We need to find a boat," he panted. "The fishermen of the delta leave their skiffs in the hidden inlets. If we can find one, we can reach the great green sea before dawn." As they navigated the labyrinth of reeds, the environment changed. The air grew thicker with the scent of salt and rotting vegetation. This was the edge of the world, where the Nile finally surrendered to the Mediterranean. They stumbled upon a small, secluded clearing where a single, narrow papyrus skiff was tied to a rotted wooden stake. Hori checked the boat. It was small, barely large enough for two, but it was light and silent. He grabbed the single wooden oar. "Get in. If we stay in the middle of the channel, the reeds will hide us from the torches on the bank." As they pushed off, Hori looked back. The watchtower of the two herons was now a silhouette against a sky filled with smoke. The black smoke from the indigo seeds was still rising, a dark pillar that seemed to blot out the stars. "Look," Merritt said, pointing north. Far out on the horizon, where the sea met the sky, a series of lights appeared. They were not the steady lanterns of Egyptian fishing boats. They were the cold, flickering fires of a war fleet. The Hittites were there. They had seen the broken signal, and though they hadn't launched a full attack, they were moving closer to the shore, probing the defenses like a knife feeling for a gap in a suit of armor. They're waiting for the vizier to open the gates of the coastal fort. Hori realized. "We have to reach the fortress of Migdol before Seneb does. If the vizier's orders reach the commander there, the fleet will land unopposed." Hori dipped the oar into the water. Every stroke was a battle against exhaustion. He was no longer just a scribe of the library. He was the final messenger between a kingdom and its collapse. The fortress of Migdol stood like a limestone giant at the very edge of the delta. Its foundations were sunk deep into the silt and salt of the Mediterranean shore, its whitewashed walls gleaming like a ghost under the setting moon. This was the final lock on the door of Egypt. If Migdol's gates were open from the inside, the Hittite fleet could pour into the Nile branches, bypassing the pharaoh's main armies in the south. Hori and Merritt's skiff drifted silently through the morning mist, the papyrus hull brushing against the salt-crusted stones of the fortress's watergate. Hori's hands were blistered and raw from the oar, and his eyes were bloodshot from lack of sleep. "The watergate is guarded, but it's the only way," Hori whispered. "The land gate will be swarming with the vizier's couriers by now." They slipped into the dark, echoing tunnel of the lower canal. The air inside smelled of brine and wet stone. A single torch flickered on a bracket, illuminating a grizzled guard sitting on a wooden bench, his spear leaning precariously against the wall. He was nodding off, his head drooping toward his chest. Hori stepped out of the boat, his wet sandals making a soft movement on the stone. He didn't use a knife. Instead, he pulled out his scribe's pallet. He reached into the guard's belt, not for a key, but for the log of the Watergate. "Who goes there?" The guard grunted, jolting awake as Hori's shadow fell over him. He reached for his spear, but Hori held up the evidence scroll from Tsar. "I am the royal archivist." Hori hissed, his voice carrying the authority of a man who had faced death in the desert. "The vizier's orders for this fortress are a death warrant for Egypt. Take me to the commander, or you will be the first to hang when the pharaoh arrives." The guard, confused and intimidated by Hori's intensity and the official-looking seals, hesitated. Before he could decide, Merit stepped into the light. "The Hittite ships are already on the horizon," she said, her voice steady. "Every second you waste is a second the enemy uses to prepare their ladders." The guard looked from the bedraggled pair to the dark tunnel behind them. He grabbed his torch. "The commander is in the West Tower, preparing the morning reports. But if this is a trick, Scribe, you won't live to see the sunrise." They were led up a series of narrow, winding stairs. The fortress was waking up. The sounds of sharpening bronze and the bark of officers' commands echoed through the stone corridors. They reached the command room just as a messenger bird, a hawk with a silver band on its leg, landed on the window ledge. Commander Taha, a man whose face looked like it was carved from granite, was already reaching for the message. He looked at Hori with suspicion. "I was told a thief was coming. A man who stole the vizier's own horse." "I stole the horse to save the king, Commander," Hori said, pointing at the hawk. "That message tells you to stand down your archers and prepare for a diplomatic arrival." "It is a lie. The diplomats carry iron swords and are led by the Iron King himself." Taha unrolled the message. His eyes narrowed. He looked at the signature, the shimmering silver ink that Hori had predicted. Then, he looked at Hori's evidence from the watchtower and the fortress of Tsar. "The vizier says you are a traitor," Taha said slowly, "but the vizier's ink is foreign, and your words have the weight of truth. Which shall I believe?" Hori stepped to the window, pointing at the sea. The mist was clearing. The first rays of the sun hit the water, revealing the Hittite fleet. They weren't waiting anymore. They were rowing hard for the shore, their purple sails unfurled. "Believe your own eyes, Commander," Hori said. Commander Taha stood at the apex of the tower, his eyes fixed on the horizon. The Hittite fleet was no longer a collection of distant specks. It was a wall of purple sails and gleaming bronze, cutting through the Mediterranean spray. The rhythmic beat of their war drums carried across the water, a low, ominous thrumming that vibrated in the very stone of the fortress walls. "The vizier's message says the Hittites come as guests of the pharaoh," Taha said, his voice grating like shifting sand. He held the silver ink scroll in one hand and the heavy hilt of his sword in the other. "It says that any officer who fires upon them is a rebel against the throne. If I listen to you, Scribe, I am choosing the word of a muddy fugitive over the king's highest advisor. You are choosing the word of the written truth over a golden lie." Hori countered, his voice steady despite the exhaustion threatening to pull him down. He stepped closer to the commander, pulling the blue glass cylinder from his bag. "This is not oil. This is the signal for the Iron King to land. Seneb, the vizier's shadow, was carrying it. Why would a guest need a secret signal to enter a friendly port?" Before Taha could respond, a frantic shouting erupted from the landward gate. A column of dust was rising from the Delta Road. It was Seneb, leading a fresh detachment of the vizier's guard. They had ridden through the night, their horses lathered in blood and foam. "Open the gate." Seneb's voice shrieked from below. "I carry the vizier's command. Arrest the commander for treason. He shelters the thief Hori." Taha looked down at the courtyard, then back at the sea. The Hittite ships were now within bowshot. The lead galley slowed, its oars backing water. They were waiting for the gates of the waterport to swing open as promised. "Commander," Merit said, stepping forward, "you know the archives. You know that whenever the Hittites come in peace, they bring 100 times their weight in iron. Look at their decks. Those are not diplomatic gifts. Those are siege engines." Taha's jaw tightened. He turned to his signalman. "Signal the fleet. Approach no further or we fire." "But sir..." The signalman hesitated. "The vizier's orders." "I am the commander of Migdol," Taha roared, "and my eyes see an invasion. If the vizier wants to hang me, he can do it after I've saved his province." He turned to Hori. "Scribe, if you are wrong, we are both dead men by sunset. If you are right, tell me how to stop a fleet when my own vizier has bled my armory dry of fire arrows." Hori's mind flashed back to the iron ledger and his studies in the library's chemical scrolls. He remembered the properties of the blue signal powder, the lapis and sulfur. "We don't need fire arrows," Hori said, a desperate plan forming. "We have the blue powder Seneb brought. If we mix it with the oil from the storehouse and launch it via the catapults, it won't just burn. It will create a fog of sulfur that will choke the rowers and blind the archers. We can turn their own signal into their shroud." Taha looked at Hori with a grim smile. "A scribe who knows how to burn the world. I like that. Guards, to the storehouse. Prepare the blue breath." The air atop the ramparts of Migdol was sharp with the scent of salt and the rising heat of the sun. Below, at the landgate, Seneb's men were battering against the heavy timbers, their cries of traitor muffled by the thickness of the stone. But Taha's soldiers no longer listened. They were focused on the sea, where the Hittite galleys were beginning to deploy their landing boats. Hori stood by the great catapult, his hands stained with the blue dust of the signal powder. He was mixing it into large ceramic jars of thickened olive oil, his movements precise despite his shaking fingers. "It must be timed perfectly," Hori explained to the catapult crew. "If it hits the water, it's useless. We need it to shatter against the decks or the hulls of the lead ships. The heat of the impact and the small wicks we've attached will ignite the sulfur." The first Hittite ship, a massive trireme with a gilded lion's head on the prow, surged forward. Its deck was crowded with soldiers in iron-scaled armor. They raised their shields, a wall of metal intended to deflect the bronze-tipped arrows of the Egyptian defenders. "Fire!" Taha commanded. The catapult groaned as the tension was released. The first jar of blue breath sailed through the air, a dark arc against the morning sky. It struck the lion's head prow of the lead ship. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then, a brilliant, blinding flash of blue fire erupted. A thick, choking cloud of yellow-blue smoke billowed across the deck. The Hittite rowers, trapped in the lower decks, began to scream as the sulphurous gas was sucked into the oarports. The ship's rhythm faltered. The trireme lurched to the left, crashing into the galley behind it. "Again!" Hori shouted, his voice nearly lost in the roar of the battle. Jar after jar sailed into the fleet. The sea was no longer blue. It was a churning chaos of smoke and fire. The Iron King's fleet, so confident in their secret deal with the vizier, found themselves trapped in a chemical nightmare. They couldn't see to navigate, and their iron armor, so strong against swords, offered no protection against the burning fog. Suddenly, the land gate gave way with a splintering crash. Seneb burst into the courtyard, his face twisted in a mask of homicidal rage. "Cease this madness!" he screamed, waving the vizier's seal. "You are destroying the alliance." He ran toward the north tower, a dagger in his hand, his eyes locked on Hori. "You!" "It always comes back to the scribe." Hori backed away, his heels touching the edge of the rampart. Seneb lunged, but he wasn't watching the shadows. Merit stepped from behind a stone buttress, wielding a heavy bronze measuring rod she had taken from the fortress architect's office. She swung it with the precision of a gardener clearing a stubborn weed. The rod struck Seneb's wrist, and the dagger clattered to the floor. Before the secretary could recover, Taha's guards surrounded him, their spears leveled at his throat. "The alliance is burning in the harbor, secretary," Taha said, stepping down from the command platform. "And you will be the one to explain it to the pharaoh." "The pharaoh?" Seneb laughed, a high, broken sound. "The pharaoh is dead. The vizier has already sent the poisoned wine to his tent at the Delta camp. You are fighting for a ghost." Hori's heart stopped. He looked at the royal ring of the princess still in his bag. "No." Hori whispered. "The pharaoh has a protector he doesn't even know he has." The silence that followed Seneb's declaration was more terrifying than the roar of the catapults. If the pharaoh was dead, the defense of Migdol was a hollow victory. Egypt would descend into a civil war between the vizier's factions and the loyalists of the south. "He lies," Merit said, though her voice lacked its usual fire. "He has to lie." "He doesn't," Hori said, his eyes scanning the Delta Road. "But the poison, the blue lily oil, it takes hours to work. I know the chemistry. If the wine was sent this morning, there is still a chance." Suddenly, the horizon behind them, the landward horizon, began to shimmer. It wasn't the dust of the vizier's men. It was a sea of purple and gold. The royal chariot corps, led by the pharaoh himself, appeared on the ridge. Beside him rode General Mentu and the princess, her blue-adorned hair streaming in the wind. The pharaoh was not dead. The princess, having received the message Hori had attached to the palace cat days ago, had intercepted the poisoned wine and mobilized the personal guard. They hadn't come to arrest Hori. They had come to witness his victory. The vizier Rahotep was found in his chambers in Thebes that evening, clutching a final, unfinished letter to the Hittite king. He was not executed. The pharaoh, in a display of cold mercy, sentenced him to be the chief librarian of the salt mines, a position where he would be surrounded by the very records of his own failure for the rest of his life. The final records. Years later, Hori sat in the great library of Thebes. He was no longer a junior scribe hiding in the shadows of the shelves. He was the High Chancellor of the records, the man who ensured that no word in Egypt was written in shadow. Hori picked up his reed pen. He looked at the royal ring of the princess, which now sat in a glass case on his desk as a reminder. He began to write the final lines of the chronicle he had started so long ago. Many think that history is made by kings with golden swords or generals with iron wills. But I have learned that history is a tapestry of ink. It is made by those who notice the small marks, the silver sheen on a signature, and the weight of a hollow vessel. For as long as there is a scribe to record the truth, no darkness can truly swallow the sun. He blew on the wet ink and rolled the papyrus. He didn't hide it in a secret shelf. He placed it in the center of the hall, where every student could read it. Curiosity. Hori whispered to the empty room, a small smile playing on his lips, is indeed a dangerous thing, but only for those who have something to hide.